The story begins in the bright and beautiful palace where the Widgreen family lives. The family's eldest son, Essie Widgreen, spoke to his sister about her birthday coming up soon. He asked if she needed anything, or if there was anything she wanted. Lydia Widgreen smiled at her brother and told him she didn't need anything. However, Essie, surprised, said she always said that she doesn't even like dolls. By the way, right now, our heroine was quietly burning love letters in front of her brother. Then, in response to Essie's words, she laughed. In fact, the fact that she doesn't want anything is a complete lie. But what does Lydia really want? It's actually quite simple. Her main desire is not to die at the hands of her brother, Essie Widgreen. The main thing is to survive. Anyway, she threw away the last letter and said that in any case, right after her birthday would be Essie's birthday. Approaching him, she said that he would finally officially become an adult because he would turn 18. Incidentally, it is on this day that her younger brother's coming-of-age ceremony will take place. This is the day when the heroine will appear before them. And it's also the day our heroine will finally escape from here. Lydia couldn't wait. The action then takes us to the nighttime city of Seoul, which was quite lively at that hour. In a past reality, she was a university student. But if she hadn't met the man who was stalking her, her life wouldn't have ended like this. The man, perplexed, yelled at her and asked why the hell she was rejecting him when she had just smiled at him. The girl was terrified. One way or another, she understood that she was not going to give up so easily, so she started to run away and did not even understand what was happening around her. In the end, without even noticing, she found herself on the road right along which a truck was rushing at full speed. She couldn't believe this was happening to her. She really was incredibly unlucky. One way or another, she thought she was going to die there. Soon after, the action takes us to a bright room containing a crib and a child, as well as a nanny who was looking after Milady. Yes, that's right. Our heroine was reborn in this world and became 2-year-old Lydia Widgreen. What could be better than living a life dying at the hands of a stalker and now ending up here? Everything here was like something out of a fantasy novel. Of course, the royal family ruled here, and there was even class inequality. Even as in the most popular novels, there was magic in this world. Well, our heroine was lucky to be born with a spoon in her mouth that wasn't just gold, but diamond. She became not only a noblewoman, but also the eldest daughter of a ducal family. Every road she walked was covered with a red carpet. All she had to do was walk on it and live happily. Since her previous life had been so unsuccessful, all this had to be a gift from God, as our heroine believed. But of course, everything couldn't have been so great, because her joy didn't last long. The action takes us a little into the future, or more precisely to the night, when Lydia got out of bed, thinking about how thirsty she was. As she passed through one of the doors, to her surprise, the girl noticed a glow as well as the voices of her parents. Coming closer, she decided to eavesdrop. She suddenly heard the words, "If Lydia finds out, she must be very upset." The girl, of course, didn't understand what they were talking about. Then the father said that from childhood to this day, he raised her as his own daughter. Remembering all the privileges, they were shattered in the blink of an eye. So she's not his biological daughter, but adopted? Falling to the ground, she couldn't believe it was true. How could everything be so good and then so bad? Things went like this. Even before the marriage, the Duchess was diagnosed with infertility. The woman was 100% convinced of this. So after going through difficulties, they decided to adopt Lydia. But it turned out that this doctor was actually a fraud. As a result, her brother was already growing in the Duchess's womb, meaning she now had neither status nor life. All the following days, she realized there was no way she could get the diamond spoon back. Wouldn't they abandon her entirely when her brother was born? While the nanny was trying to figure out what was happening to Lydia, our heroine was thinking that if her parents decided to kick her out, she hoped that she would at least be able to pack her things. After the nanny asked if everything was okay, the girl got up from her tear-stained pillow and said that she wanted to eat. In any case, she didn't even know what she could take with her. It took her long enough to realize it was best to move everything to her room. Day after day, she felt a sense of uncertainty, unsure when her parents would tire of her. Would they kick her out of the house today or tomorrow? So, 7 years had passed. Why hadn't they kicked her out yet? Lydia couldn't explain why she was so emotional. Incidentally, today was her birthday, and she was 11 years old. She still wondered when they would kick her out. After all, her brother was old enough to run away. So why were they keeping her around? Were they trying to isolate themselves from her? After a moment's thought, she jumped up joyfully, thinking that this would be the perfect scenario. She would even say she was incredibly lucky. At that moment, 7-year-old Essie Widgreen walked into the room. One of his special characteristics was that he always sided with his sister. Seeing her brother, our heroine ran up to him and asked what was wrong. He happily told her it was her birthday. Soon he pulled out a huge bag from over his shoulder and said that this was his gift for her. Lydia looked at it all in bewilderment and was surprised by how huge the gift was. When had they managed to prepare it? In any case, she started to thank him, but as Lydia pulled the string to open her gift, her joyful face suddenly turned to horror. An unknown girl fell to the ground, looking at Lydia in tears. Our heroine looked at the girl's face and realized she was a maid. Her name was Melissa. Naturally, the girl, perplexed, asked what it was. Essie smiled happily, looking at his sister, and said it was a doll. He explained that he was going to find the exact same one that broke, but he was told that it was no longer for sale. In any case, he apologized for it coming out rumpled, but he still tried to prepare it. Then he asked his sister if she liked his gift. Our heroine was shocked. The doll she once played with looked very realistic, but it was just a toy. In turn, this little genius dressed the maid in the same dress and dragged her here. How could anyone even think of such a thing? Does Essie really think this is normal? Can't a 7-year-old tell the difference between people and dolls? She slapped him. Lydia screamed in horror and asked her perplexed brother what he was doing, and soon ordered him to untie the girl right now. Essie asked if she wasn't satisfied with the gift. Our heroine asked how she couldn't be angry after something like that. He had to understand what she meant. Anyway, she told him to stand in the corner and raise his hands. Looking at her younger brother, she even suspected he had some mental issues. In any case, she asked him never to do that again. The guy snorted. Lydia hoped he understood. Even though he seemed to have a hard time understanding it, she was a complete fool to think that. Soon after, the action takes us to a park where our heroine was sitting and enjoying nature. At that very moment, Essie started walking towards her again, so the girl looked at her brother and asked what happened. The guy lifted the tied-up butler, saying that she didn't like his last doll, so he hoped that this doll would suit her. Our heroine spat out her tea at what she saw. She couldn't understand what her brother was even saying. She hoped her brother didn't think she'd gotten mad at him just because she didn't like the doll. He was a psychopath after all. And again, the girl screamed in horror, asking what the hell Essie was doing. She begged him to come to his senses, free the boy, and get out of there. Looking at the perplexed Essie, the girl understood that most likely he was thinking that everything was so simple. She believed that for her brother, concepts such as family people, animals, objects, and so on didn't exist. All of these were just toys for him. Lydia suddenly thought that next time she should punish her brother much more severely. And again, she was a fool to think so, because the problems only got worse. After a while, the action takes us to the library, where Lydia, to her horror, discovered that she was in a novel. This book is The Spring of the Goddess Agrita. The plot of the book unfolds in a special world. Not only our heroine, but there are also many other characters in this world that we will get to know. The villain here was Essie Widgreen. The supporting character was Lydia Widgreen. The girl hoped it was just a joke. Either the names of real people were used here, or they were chosen at random. At this time, the maid Bessie, who always looked after our heroine, was busy cleaning. But at that moment, she heard my lady's screams. Turning around, she asked what happened, to which Lydia thrust the book in front of her face and asked what was in the book. However, at that moment, the girl asked in bewilderment if these weren't just blank pages. Lydia, hearing these words, was stunned. She understood that Bessie had no reason to lie to her. The girl flipped through the pages and said that no matter how you looked, there were still blank sheets of paper everywhere. That evening, the girl continued reading the book. From the plot, she noticed that the events of the last few days mirrored the book's plot exactly. This was the world described in the novel. She couldn't believe she could see the future. Pushing those thoughts aside, she decided she wasn't crazy, or maybe it was her special gift given to her to remember the past. However, this was far from the most important problem. According to this novel, there was another interesting detail. She'll be killed again. Our heroine read all these words in shock, not believing it would happen again. The book said that her parents would die 2 years later due to an incurable disease. Shortly after their death, it would be confirmed that Lydia had been adopted. Essie's attitude towards his sister will change dramatically because he realizes that his sister does not have a drop of her parents' blood inside her, which is why she does not dare to look him in the face. Eventually, it all comes to a head, resulting in Essie stabbing her sister with her blade. She'll be killed by her own brother. When Essie grows up, he will become the head of the household. When upset, he will turn into a tyrant, mercilessly eliminating anything that irritates him. But in the end, this evil man falls in love with the heroine Agreda. He fell in love with her at first sight, and by the way, he even got rid of everyone around her. Despite all this, Lydia's death would soon come. With belated regret, the girl decided there was no point in even dreaming about anything. She shouldn't be making any plans anymore. The best thing for her to do would be to treat her brother kindly without scolding him. Finally, morning came. Lydia hadn't slept all night wondering what to do. Luckily, she made a decision, and she decided to run away. One way or another, she fell to the ground, thinking that nothing would work out for her anyway. If Essie finds out about her departure now, he will be very angry, and what's more, he might even kill her earlier than according to the plot. Looking at the ceiling, the girl understood that Essie, according to the plot, would fall in love with the heroine at first sight. At that time, he wouldn't care about his sister, and then she'd pack all her things and run away. She thought long and hard about what she should steal that day. However, Lydia decided there was one more important thing to take care of before that: preventing her parents' deaths. In ancient times, it was believed that sincere prayer was enough for heaven to hear you. That's why she turned to the Lord and asked him to hear her as soon as possible. Unfortunately, the prayers were of no avail. The day finally arrived, when the bells rang and the priest read the words praying for the dead to rest in peace. Our heroine was very upset that the heavens could hear her, but were still unable to change the future. At that moment, Essie called his sister, and taking her hand, he told her that now there were only two of them left. Looking at her brother, she knew it was true. They were alone. All that remained was a minor character who would die at the villain's hand, and that villain's future. Our heroine suddenly started crying, realizing she'd screwed up. Essie, surprised, asked if she was really crying. Even though she's given up on all of this, her parents' death still saddens her. But what about the escape? It didn't go as smoothly as planned. She didn't even notice how quickly time flew by, so she had no idea when it would all happen. Meanwhile, the girl was asking if all the invitations had been sent properly. She wanted to make sure there were no errors and to check that everything was all right with the dishes. At this point, our heroine turned to Alex and asked him to go down to the basement to check the list to see if any things were missing. Soon the action takes us outside. Lydia seemed to be drinking tea calmly, but this was not the case. Her hands were shaking, and sweat was running uncontrollably down her forehead. The girl tried to calm herself down, saying that everything would happen at the right time and in the right place, so there was no need to be so nervous. One way or another, she was glad that tomorrow would be the day when the fateful meeting between the main character and the villain would take place at the event. For him, seeing Agreda for the first time, everything else will lose its meaning. So thanks to this, the secondary character will successfully escape. Everything was supposed to be perfect according to the plan. The escape was supposed to take place at the party's opening, because that's when the heroine would show up. The moment Essie falls in love with Agreda is our heroine's only chance. After that, the guy will get rid of everyone around Agreda, and it will only take him a few days. The girl knew that if she missed this chance, she would go straight to the next world. She decided to drink the tea anyway, but suddenly felt scared. The reason for her fright was the unexpected arrival of the Duke, who came to visit his sister. Bessie soon brought another cup of tea, and then told them that they looked happy together. Our heroine had heard this too often, so now it didn't matter at all. At this point, Essie said that he was going to look at the clock tower tomorrow morning, so he wanted to know his sister's opinion. The girl asked if he was talking about the one in the square, meaning to go with her. Essie nodded, indicating that she wanted to go there too. Taking a sip of tea, the girl tried to remember if she had actually said that. She didn't know how Essie could still remember it. In any case, she didn't want this because she was planning to run away. The girl said she'd seen the chapel before. It was so old that there was nothing of value in it. Our heroine didn't understand the stupid excuse she'd come up with, but she said it was true. She then asked if it wouldn't be better to destroy the chapel and rebuild it. As soon as Essie said that, if his sister said that, he'd think twice. Lydia instantly realized she shouldn't have said that. She tried in horror to understand what kind of crazy thing she had done, because she should have understood everything much earlier. The very next morning, Essie approached Lydia and reminded her of what they had discussed the previous day. Confused, Lydia asked what he was talking about. The boy smiled sweetly at his sister and said he had figured it out completely. That clock tower was now destroyed. Our heroine's brain stopped functioning after her brother's latest strange action. She asked him a couple of times what he had said. The girl asked if he really meant that he destroyed the chapel in the square. The guy just nodded. Anyone hearing this would have thought the chapel was some kind of pathetic sandcastle. Lydia asked him why he did it. Did he understand how crazy it was? The guy in turn said it would have been even better if he'd done it a little earlier. He then handed over a cookie for his sister, but she said she'd had enough. Lydia, meanwhile, realized that her brother really was a psychopath. But why did she say such a stupid thing yesterday? She meant it would be better to tear it down and build a new one. Anyone else would understand that this was a joke, but Essie is not joking at all. He is sincere in everything. How could this psychopathic villain become her little brother? He didn't even think about the random victims, so she's supposed to justify herself to their chapel? She sighed, hoping they had all gone to a better world. Suddenly, our heroine raised her head and turned to her brother. The girl asked when he destroyed the tower, to which the guy calmly replied that he did it in the morning. Our heroine jumped up in incredible shock and rushed off somewhere. Essie, surprised, asked her sister what had happened. Meanwhile, the butler stood in the corridor, to whom Lydia addressed herself, and ordered him to stand still. Approaching him, she ordered him to bring a list of everyone who died in the chapel collapse. The young man, perplexed, said he would do it right away. Looking at the running butler, the girl hoped that the thought that came into her head was not true. Still, she thought she was worrying too much and should calm down. At that moment, her younger brother approached her and asked what was wrong. It all came down to this. This morning, the heroine Agrita entered the clock tower. On this blessed day of charity, she was going to pray for the general well-being. Yet this villain, her younger brother, destroyed the chapel this morning. Really, what could possibly go wrong? Lydia barely restrained herself from saying anything unnecessary. She gave the order just in case, just by the way. She was certain that Agrita couldn't have died. After all, she was the main heroine of this world. Just then, a butler ran up to Lydia and handed her the list she'd requested. She took it and thanked him. She soon began to study this document, and to her happiness discovered that the losses were not as great as she thought. Suddenly, the very name appeared before her eyes. Agrita Grace was dead. The girl hadn't believed it until the very end and considered it a lie. At that very moment, the leaf fell from her hands. Essie turned to her in surprise, noticing that she was almost fainting. At that moment, Lydia asked how Agrita could have died. After that, she started mumbling about something, so Essie brought her to her senses and asked her what she was talking about. At that moment, our heroine felt nothing but the sound of her mind crumbling. This was simply insanity! In her mind, she screamed at the top of her lungs, thinking that this boy was crazy. He killed the main character. How could anyone do such a thing? And again, after that, she just ran forward without even saying anything. The boy, perplexed, asked his sister what had happened. Our heroine, in turn, was not going to answer his questions, because after all this, there was only one option left for her. At that very moment, she locked herself in the room. She had originally planned to use this in case of an unsuccessful escape, but she tried to preserve it until the very end. She reached into her locker, thinking that she had hoped she wouldn't have to spend it at all. According to the novel, her life was destined to end tragically, so she did everything she could to survive. This is one of the ways. As she opened the box, she told herself that originally this was what Agrita was supposed to have. But from the very beginning, there were 3 gods in this world. The first god was the god of destruction, followed by the god of time, and finally the goddess of love. People built temples for each of them. However, 10 years ago, one of the oracles descended upon all the temples. On the day when the full moon illuminated the lowest point of the world, the goddess would appear. She was supposed to care for everyone and watch over them. Opinions were divided on the authenticity of the prophecy. The question was what the actual meaning was. In general, scientists argued that the day of the brightest full moon should be calculated. However, there was a failure. The full moon in the oracle's words bears no relation to the actual full moon. It symbolizes the prince. This principle of the empire was called the Little Sun. The crown prince hid his identity outside the castle in order to understand the lives of ordinary people. In a cold and squalid alley, he helped a poor child, but after that, he accidentally ran into a Greta. Because of this incident, the girl will receive the title of crown princess, and according to the oracle, she will become the new empress in the future. When this happens, she will be honored with the honor of being worshipped as a goddess. The temple and scholars will learn the truth, but all this will happen later. The temple knows nothing now, so it will call upon them to sincerely welcome the representatives of God on earth when he descends to them. Well, the item in the box is an object created in a temple dedicated to the god of time. This bead has the power to turn back time exactly 1 day. To trigger the effect, this bead had to be shattered. It is a true gift prepared by the Temple of Time for Agrita, and it took 10 years to create 30 beads. So where did our heroine get these precious beads? It's simple. She stole them. Only 15 were stolen intentionally. If she's caught, the temple will sentence her to hang, and they'll definitely try to kill her. She believes that stealing half of it was in a way a good faith endeavor. After all, she's going to use this to save Agrita. So if you look at it that way, it's not exactly simple theft. With this bead, she can turn back time and save Agrita. But the more she thinks about it, the more astonishing it seems. Remembering her joyful brother and his wonderful news that the chapel had been destroyed, the girl asked herself only one question. How could he have killed the heroine? Her anger meter reached its limit, because if it weren't for Essie, she wouldn't have done this. She wanted to curse her brother right in his face. As she began to swing, she decided that she should come to her senses because she had to break the bead. Suddenly, she thought about it. Her escape would only succeed if Agrita remained alive. At that moment, she realized again that just by breaking the bead, the day would instantly roll back, and since everything would return in time, then she could do something. Meanwhile, Essie was discussing something with the butler, but at that very moment, a woman's scream was heard. Turning their heads, they noticed Lydia rushing towards them at full speed. What happened? Our heroine thought that enough time had passed since her brother grew up. She didn't want to die prematurely, so she still held back and wasn't honest, but at that very moment, she screamed and told her brother he was crazy. Thinking that people's lives aren't worth a penny was too convenient. Looking into her brother's eyes, she expressed her sincere wish to him, asking him not to live like this. Soon after, she broke the bead. The action shifts to an unknown location. At this point, someone was actively calling Lydia. Our heroine turned around in horror and noticed that the person was Bessie. The nanny in turn handed over a shawl, saying that the weather was getting colder. After thanking the nanny and taking the shawl, Lydia only wondered if she had returned to yesterday. Looking around, she caught herself thinking that she remembered how she had gone out onto the balcony yesterday, and then asked Bessie to bring her an autumn shawl. Our heroine then caught herself thinking again that she had returned to the past. After that, the girl collapsed into a chair. Bessie approached the lady in confusion and asked if she was okay, to which Lydia told her that she was perfectly fine. Her legs were just a little tired. She then asked the maid to leave for a moment, as she wanted to be alone. Bessie agreed, but asked again if she was completely okay. As soon as Lydia said that everything was fine, Bessie headed for the exit and asked to call her if she needed anything. After these words, the balcony door slammed shut, and our heroine was left alone with her thoughts. She knew her younger now-grown brother had neither common sense nor morals. Though she was careful in her actions, she couldn't understand what was going on in his mind. However, raising her head, she caught herself thinking that this even chilled her soul. It was that feeling when you speak your mind with complete sincerity. Even if only a little, she still felt better. The time beads were simply amazing. At that moment, she stood up from her chair, remembering about the beads. She should check them. Once she moved into the room, as was logical, there were 14 of them left. She used one of the 15 beads, so everything is correct. Soon after, the girl opened the door and began to look out into the corridor. Finally, seeing the butler on the horizon, she asked him to come to her for a second. The guy approached her, and Lydia immediately asked him what day it was. The butler looked at her in surprise and said it was September 13th. Looking at the butler's puzzled expression, She realized that if the date was yesterday, there could be no doubt everything had worked. This bead is truly extraordinary. At that moment, the girl said she had simply forgotten the date, so she asked, and now he could go. Closing the door to her room again, Lydia realized that Agrita, who used them only for the sake of others, was no less amazing. That's why they called her a goddess. If she had been given such abilities, she would have been so greedy, which is not typically her nature. Agrita used them for the benefit of others without ulterior motives. In any case, the girl once again cast aside all thoughts, because with these beads, she could save Agrita. All that remained was to prevent the protagonist's death. Without further ado, she'll say the clock tower was the cause. Of course, the main reason is Essie himself, but she can't change that. Meanwhile, the clock was moving toward midday. Essie would suggest entering the chapel this evening, half a day later. She knew it would be better to go there now, rather than tomorrow afternoon. Her brother had been busy all day and hadn't left his office, and it was rare for him to see a glimmer of light in the evening. Lydia understood that only he could have achieved such abnormal results in such a short time. He truly was a true psychopathic villain. She of course shouldn't say that the chapel is old or that it wouldn't hurt to demolish it, but that's not enough because her opponent is Essio. Suddenly standing up, she wondered, what should she do? Was there really no other reason for her refusal? At that very moment, enlightenment came into her head, or rather, a new safe and plausible excuse. So evening arrived. She went down to the living room to have some tea, and no compelling reasons came to mind. Smiling slyly, she thought about how she'd come up with something else instead. Since she had no reason to say no, she'd do everything she could to avoid saying it. Before thinking that this sounded like a mare's ramblings, you only had to listen to her plan further. Essie was in the garden that day, and apparently found her by chance when they met. He suggested they take a tour of the clock tower. The best way to reject an offer is to not hear it at all. In other words, as long as she doesn't run into her brother this time, everything will be fine. She deliberately moved the scene to the living room. Her brother was busy with work. He'd spend the next hour in his office, and before then, she had to leave. She just needs to go to her room and not come out until tomorrow. It's worth the time spent worrying, but a tragic death like this for a main character would never have happened without a reason. At that very moment, the brilliant plan, as well as the thoughts of our heroine, were interrupted by her brother turning to her. The girl turned around in confusion and noticed Essie standing in front of her. The guy glanced at his shocked sister and asked if she was okay. Our heroine, however, continued to stare at him in bewilderment, wondering how he'd ended up here and why the events of the past were not supposed to repeat themselves. At that moment, a maid entered the room, noticed the Duke, and said that she had sent Alex some time ago. Lydia, perplexed, asked what had happened, to which the girl replied that she had not been herself since the morning. Bessie was surprised and shocked that the lady did not respond when she called her, as if she had completely withdrawn into herself. The maid thought the master should know about this, so she sent Alex to fetch him. As soon as he mentioned it, Essie came down here. By the way, she said that the lady's thoughts were completely out of place. Our heroine was incredibly shocked that Bessie had played such a trick on her. Essie looked at his sister in surprise and said that if he'd known this sooner, he would have come to her right away. Lydia sheepishly said that everything was fine. The girl immediately wondered what if her brother asked her to go to the clock tower again. She wouldn't be able to find an excuse to refuse. Suddenly, she caught herself thinking that she could take advantage of this misunderstanding and pretend to be ill. Having decided to act on this plan, Lydia suddenly feigned a headache, saying that she really felt unwell. The girl began to demonstratively bow back, but at that moment, Essie grabbed his sister and asked her if she was okay. Our heroine felt a sudden unplanned admiration. Her brother's torso was strong and fully grown. She hoped she'd managed to push him away. However, at that moment, the guy looked at his sister with empathy and asked where and what hurt. Lydia thought that if she described her symptoms in too much detail, her lie would quickly be exposed. She said she had low energy, felt weak, and had no appetite. The girl said she didn't know what was happening to her, but she was exhausted. Essie continued to hug her, and it seemed strange. She remembered how he wanted to outgrow her, because he was so little, but now she feels so protected. He was cute back then, and in terms of beauty, Essie could be compared to a graceful doll. The guy suddenly asked if Lydia had gone out anywhere. Our heroine looked at him in surprise, and he told her that since he had been busy all the time now, he could devote a little time to her. The guy then suggested they go to the square together the following afternoon. After all, she'd mentioned earlier that she'd like to see the clock tower. Lydia screamed in her soul as loudly as she could. Her plan had failed once again. Essie said he would have time during lunch, and our heroine suddenly began coughing, telling him that she couldn't do it. At that very moment, he ordered the servants to call a doctor. And if the doctor who was in their mansion was not able to take care of his sister, then he was not worth a penny. After he said that he wouldn't let this go, our heroine started hitting the red button, thinking that this was no longer a joke and the situation was becoming dangerous. The girl suddenly screamed and said it was all because of the dust she'd been coughing because of it, and nothing serious had happened. The doctor was bringing her some potent supplements. She understood that if doctors were called in like this 9 times out of 10, they would be morally destroyed. Their doctor was a father of 3 children. At this point, Essie sighed heavily, and soon after put his hand to his sister's head, saying that she had no fever. The guy decided this whole so-called problem was just a distraction. In that case, he suggested they leave as early as possible and have lunch outside. Lydia, tears in her eyes, realized that things were incredibly bad because she couldn't run away now. She couldn't do anything but agree. Still, she didn't understand why they were in the square and making so much noise. Why was Essie upsetting his own existence? Why was he like this? But at that moment, Bessie looked at our heroine and said that they looked great together. Of course, it was sad that history turned out this way, but still the tower has not yet been destroyed. Our heroine's ultimate goal is to prevent Agrita's death. At the very least, she shouldn't have died under the rubble of the chapel. When Lydia was getting ready for her walk, she made sure that she would never say anything bad about the tower, even with a knife at her throat, and even if a sword came into play. Our heroine knew that she had to think positively about the tower, no matter what. She had to avoid Agrita as long as possible, just look at the tower and then return. The action moves to the main hall, where the butler and Bessie were. As soon as they saw the lady, they were pleasantly shocked because she looked beautiful. Our heroine had heard people say that when she dressed up, she looked like a blooming rose. Quite a nice compliment. Lydia bowed in gratitude. Still, she thought the title Blooming Roses was rather amusing, because roses have thorns. It's a bit of a battlefield weapon, of course, against Essie. In any case, she decided she should get back to the main point. She should think of this as a distraction for the perfect escape. Incidentally, it had been a long time since she'd left the house. Bessie suddenly asked the Duke if he was coming down. Suddenly, she let out a cry. The girl looked at the Duke and was incredibly shocked by his beauty. Lydia understood that even though he was like a scary ghost to her, she still had to admit that the suit suited him very well. The boy approached his sister and, holding out his hand, asked if they could go already. Still without thinking twice, she took her younger brother by the hand and said that they could go. As Lydia stepped outside, she remembered it was 11 a.m. Agrita should be at the charity, not the chapel. She understood that if they were both just wandering around the square, they shouldn't run into her. However, around midday, a charity event will begin distributing food to those in need in the central square. Naturally, she can't go there. Ignorance of the law is no excuse. Looking around, Lydia wondered what Essie would do when, to her surprise, our heroine saw a very beautiful hair clip in front of her. Essie came up to her and asked his older sister if she liked the hairpin. The girl knew now wasn't the time to look at jewelry, but she also knew she should buy some. Lydia smiled and asked for one. Reaching into her bag, our heroine began to look for her wallet, but suddenly there was silence. The girl was horrified to realize she couldn't find her wallet, which meant the situation was dire. She couldn't believe a pickpocket had stolen her wallet. At that moment, her younger brother turned to her and asked if everything was okay. The girl only sighed heavily. Lydia, for her part, was horrified to think that when she left the mansion, she definitely checked everything. She didn't even take out her wallet on the way. In that case, she still wondered when they managed to steal it. Was it a mouse or maybe a bird? At that moment, they entered an alley, and soon Essie took out a bead, asking it to find a person. Our heroine stared at it in bewilderment, unable to figure out what it was. She assumed it was some kind of communication device, but she couldn't understand who he was ordering around now. She also realized that they didn't look like the people from their home. At that moment, she thought about it. wondering what the relationship was like between the psychopathic villain in the novel and the secret group. She immediately realized that these were dark gangs or a few dangerous people. Essie was a real villain. Maybe it's because Essie became a duke at a young age, and he needed his own power ever since their parents died. By the way, we're not even talking about physical abilities here. A secret squad that will become his right hand? However, just because Essie has his own organization doesn't mean he founded it. So what would a psychopathic villain do in such a situation? Here's the answer. This guy will kill the head of the existing organization and take his place. But why did its members who had suddenly lost their leader obey Essie? Our heroine didn't know. She assumed they were subdued by force, and she still thinks so. Lydia eavesdropped on her brother, wondering if he was talking to a gang member. In fact, the reason she hasn't been able to escape yet is because of Essie's connection to a secret organization. If she were caught trying to escape, she would die on the spot. Lydia's fears ebbed and flowed. The girl immediately became thoughtful and began talking about how her brother was destined to have Agrita. She prayed for the goddess to save her from the villain. At this point, Essie said that some time ago, a noble woman with red hair had her wallet stolen, so he wanted them to find this pickpocket. Soon after, he hid the bead and, turning to his sister, suggested they head to the chapel as they had come to see her, and the thief would be caught. Our heroine agreed, but she was still more worried about Essie's people than about the thieves of her wallet. Made her way to the chapel. She realized she was nervous and very tired. In any case, she had to escape tonight. However, she must also be careful, because if she lets her guard down and crosses the center of the square, she might encounter Agrita. At that very moment, a voice came from the Duke's jacket addressing the gentleman and saying that they had already found their target. Our heroine was shocked that everything happened so quickly. The guy in turn ordered her to report all the information. Deputies said this street pickpocket is so small, he looks like a child. He feigns illness while robbing people. Lydia was still shocked that these people were able to find the pickpocket with so little information on him. It's like the power of a criminal cartel. Essie in turn said he now understood why he hadn't noticed anything. He immediately asked for the location. The voice told the gentleman that the target was at 3 o'clock. If they could see the roof, the pickpocket was right underneath. Without further ado, Essie grabbed his sister's arm and began to lead her. The girl was perplexed. Raising her head, she noticed her brother's crazy look and decided that he seemed to be about to kill this guy. Noticing the boy they were starting to catch up with the girl, mentally asked him to run as fast as possible. Essie couldn't understand why the guy avoided crowded places if he was in the very center of the square. The voice told him that the boy was afraid of being caught, and it also seemed like he was trying to escape by handing over the stolen goods to his gang. Lydia knew they had the answers they wanted, but wasn't that enough? Soon to her horror, she heard that her brother was up to something. The girl, horrified, asked him not to even think about it, but Essie said in a cold voice that this freak should be eliminated. Our heroine was in incredible shock. Soon she remembered Agrita and began to hope that she wasn't in the square right now. Without even having time to think, a huge explosion occurred in the center of the square, which resulted in many casualties. Realizing what horror had just happened, Lydia screamed in horror and told her brother that he was a psychopath. After some time, our heroine thanked herself for the fact that everything happened exactly this way, because when she went outside, she took a bead with her just in case. That is to say, that is correct. She spent it to go back a day again. In the central square where Agrita was helping distribute free food as part of a charity event, a powerful explosion suddenly occurred. And of course, this led to another death of the main character. Lydia was furious and desperate. If not for the explosion, the chapel wouldn't have collapsed. Our heroine couldn't understand why things were this way. Was it her fault that her wallet was stolen? Or was it the pickpocket's fault? Of course, the responsibility lies with those who commit thefts right in the middle of the square, and the villain is to blame for deciding to bomb the central square. If this had happened just once, then, she might have been able to understand and accept Essie's problem. But Agrita has already died twice. Why is she so unlucky? At that very moment, the girl opened her eyes in horror, asking herself if Essie was really that unlucky. By the way, she decided to take a break and check her beads. There were already 13 left in the drawer. Lydia knew she'd done a good deed. Besides Agrita yesterday, she'd saved the lives of many people who were destined to die. However, Despite the benefits of the bead, none of this would have happened if it weren't for Essie. Despite all her complaints tomorrow, she will go with him to look at the clock tower, as if nothing had happened, and will definitely return from there without incident. This time, she was without a purse, and did not pay any attention to her surroundings. Lydia took in the sights, calmly starting from the pedestrian walkway, and right up to the outside of the square. And then at some point, they finally reached their cherished goal. They were standing right in front of the chapel doors. Once inside, they continued to escort her to the clock tower. Nothing had happened to her friends, and they had indeed arrived safely. Soon, our heroine finally reached the top and was able to see what she had worked so hard for. It was as natural as a dream. Tugging at her cheek, she asked if they could go back. Now Essie asked if she really wanted to leave already. Lydia told him she'd already seen the chapel. Essie sighed and said they could go back if she wanted. However, our heroine sensed something was wrong. If everything had been so easy and simple, then she felt incredibly sorry that it had only happened now. Tears involuntarily began to flow. Why work so hard for something so simple? Her precious beads, to her great regret, were already broken. Her younger brother, surprised, asked Lydia what had happened. Continuing to cry and wipe away her tears, the girl said that she was incredibly happy that she had finally seen the tower. It might seem surprising, but she was half honest. She really didn't want to see Agrita die a third time, so she was both embarrassed and worried. At that moment, Essie said that if he'd known she'd like it so much, he would have brought her here sooner. He apologized to his sister for his inattention. Lydia was so happy to see the tower that she couldn't help but feel a little sensitive. Apparently, her brother genuinely felt sorry for her. The most important thing is to get what you want. She entered the chapel with her brother, and Agrita was still alive. Now all she had to do was return to the house and pack her travel bag. Now she thought that this was the last time she would feel uneasy in this house, but unexpectedly for her plans changed. Initially, she had no intention of going to today's appointment and tried to find all sorts of excuses. When the party started, she expected to pack her things and get the hell out of there, but she felt too insecure. All because she had already witnessed the heroine's death twice, completely unexpectedly. At least she had seen her in the main hall among the guests. Either way, once Agrita and Essie meet face to face, our heroine successfully escapes from the palace. At this point, Bessie turned to the lady and told her that everything was ready so she could look in the mirror. Our heroine looked at herself and was pleasantly surprised, because she looked great. Bessie was working too hard, while Lydia was lost in her thoughts. The maid laughed sheepishly and said that there would be no one more beautiful than her today. Lydia said it was true, but only if she didn't include Essie. Bessie, perplexed, asked who she was even comparing her to, and asked her not to joke like that. However, our heroine was thinking that she wasn't joking at all. In any case, having added the final touches, the maid declared everything ready. Soon after these words, Lydia stood up from her chair and told her maid that she had done a wonderful job. At that moment, someone knocked on the door, and Bessie assumed he was already there. She immediately went over and opened the door, asking him to come in. Now it was time for the evening's main character to appear. The psychopathic villain appeared. Our heroine noticed that he was looking at her, and also that he was quite charming. Anyway, Essie approached his sister, and extending his hand, invited her to come. Lydia extended her hand, thinking that, as funny as it was the villains and psychopaths who were constantly getting love letters. Eloquent messages are constantly being sent to the house, from beautiful love letters to marriage proposals sent by other families. Of course, Essie has never responded to these letters before, and it will continue to do so in the future. From now on, his attention will be solely on Agrita. At least you could say that. But our heroine has a small hobby. She'll burn Essie's confession, along with her own confessions, in the fireplace anyway. Her brother didn't read them anyway. At first, she just helped Bessie deal with these kinds of letters, but it turned out to be more interesting than she thought. Moreover, Essie seems to enjoy her hobby. Every time she burns the messages, her mood improves. Soon the action takes us to the entrance of the hall, where the Duke and Lady were met by people asking them to enter. After that, the door opened, and they walked inside. Finally, the protagonist appears at the very last moment. One way or another, Essie's arrival always brought a silence, and that's true today. It's like the protagonist effect. Needless to say, greetings to the Duke followed. People expressed their honor to meet him, and they also paid compliments to Lydia and Essie. Our heroine, nevertheless, began to turn her head in different directions and search for her with her eyes. Where was the heroine? The girl thought that it would be enough for her to just look at her, and only then would she follow her. But Lydia still continued to visually search for Agrita Grace, who was standing in the middle of the crowd of people. The first thing that caught my eye was her chestnut hair. Lydia had read this book many times, so she recognized it without a problem. From behind it was clear how pure and piercing she was. Within seconds, our heroine finally found her. Her light brown hair gave her away immediately. It might seem that her beauty was rather ordinary. However, her face is special, and under the curve of her eyelashes, you can see what a rare beauty she is. Our heroine understood that the book mentioned that even without makeup, Agrita looked beautiful and delicate. It sounds simple, but how can you be beautiful without trying? Looking at Agrita, Lydia realized that there were no fashionable clothes or expensive jewelry there. But the more she looked at her, the harder it was to look away. By the way, if she can't look away, what about Essie? Where did he go? At the moment the girl turned her head, her brother also turned his head in her direction. Suddenly, he reached out to her with his hand, and our heroine froze in shock. At that moment, he pulled out a thread sticking out of her dress and successfully notified Lydia about it. Our heroine was in complete shock. What the hell was he doing? How could a thread on her dress bother him now? She saw that Agrita was over there, so why didn't he look in her direction? He should do it as soon as possible. Lydia seemed to be telepathically suggesting to him that he should see his destiny in Agrita. Nevertheless, Essie remained impenetrable. Anyway, the guy noticed his sister was looking at him strangely, so he assumed she wanted to say something. Lydia said everything was fine. Somehow, she couldn't understand why he wasn't looking at Agrita. What had happened? She mentally begged him not to look at her, but to look at Agrita. She soon decided that if he didn't want to watch it himself, she'd force him to. Our heroine raised her head in horror and asked what that was up there. The most unexpected thing was that the usual act of attracting attention turned into her pointing out a real incident. At that very moment, the chandelier fell right on Lady Grace, and thus she died, but already before Lydia's eyes. A commotion engulfed everyone present, and our heroine began to think something had gone wrong. Of course, the reception was cancelled. Naturally, this happened because the chandelier fell. The butler and Essie apologized to all the visitors and soon sent them home. However, only our heroine was perplexed and thought something was wrong. A book kills its heroine with a chandelier? That's too much even for a murderer. It all looks like an accident caused by the chandelier's fastening coming loose. However, the servant who confirmed it seemed suspicious. Lydia couldn't understand how it was possible not to check the chandelier before an event of such a scale. Moreover, there are only 5 chandeliers in the banquet hall, and only one of them had a problem, and it was the one that was supposed to fall from above directly on Agrita. No matter how unlucky she is, she can't be that unlucky. Nervously biting her finger, Lydia came to the conclusion that if Agrita had already died 3 times, then it was all down to her fate. Apparently, she was destined to die. Our heroine saw a film with a similar plot to her past life. The main characters were destined to die, but fortunately, they survive. However, the world does not leave it like that, and in the end, Agrita will die in accordance with her destiny. And if so, the world will continue to kill her. However, the girl began to shake her head, thinking that this should not have happened. She understood that if that happened, her plans would never come to fruition, and she couldn't accept that the world of this novel had no reason to kill its own heroine. And yet she couldn't find answers to the questions that came to her mind. And by the way, her head was splitting. At that moment, Essie came up to his sister and told her that she didn't look well, so he wanted to know if everything was okay. Hearing no response, he extended his hand to her and told her to go upstairs and rest, and he would take her there. Our heroine could do nothing but agree and extend her hand in response. So soon they were heading to her room. Although Lydia couldn't yet figure out what was going on, one thing was certain. She needed Agrita. Entering her room, Lydia headed toward the time beads. She knew that if she turned back the day, she would probably return and see the chapel. Now that enough time had passed, there was only an hour left before the banquet. Soon she broke the bead again. A person digs a well when he is thirsty, but what if her desire is to live? Our heroine suddenly jumped up after a while. The action took us right to where Bessie was dressing Milady. Without saying a word, Lydia jumped up and headed for the exit. As she ran, she thought how sorry she was that she had already used 3 beads, but she still had to try. Having finally found Alex, the girl took him by the arm and told him that now was not the time for unnecessary questions, and immediately asked him to lower the chandelier and check it. After some time, the butler did as he was asked and began to carefully examine the chandelier. The guy soon discovered, perplexed, that the fastening was missing. He urgently ordered a new fastening to be brought in, as everything needed to be fixed. Having finally fixed one chandelier, he caught himself thinking that he should check the other chandeliers as well. After this, the man approached Lydia and told her that it would be dangerous to leave everything like this because an accident could happen during the banquet. Anyway, he asked her how she found out. The girl said she'd just had a bad dream. Soon she became thoughtful. The chandelier was fine now, but her gaze then turned to the statue, which seemed suspicious to her. What if it suddenly collapsed on someone? After that, she noticed a vase. The girl was curious why they had such a large vase in the hall. Our heroine was very worried, and everything seemed extremely suspicious to her. That's why she said she had a bad feeling about this. Lydia added that the dream was too ominous, and she wanted to know if they postponed the start of the banquet, whether it would be possible to change the decoration and layout of the banquet hall. The man said that this could be fixed, and soon our heroine began to command the butlers, telling them to do all sorts of tasks and get rid of the decorations. Agrita's death. If there was even a shred of uncertainty, then trouble was inevitable. She couldn't ignore the threats. The girl had been harassing the butler all this time, but in doing so, she got rid of all the suspicious and dangerous things. After some time, Bessie continued to dress Lydia, and she in turn gave her final instructions. A couple of minutes later, the maid breathed a sigh of relief and told her mistress that everything was finally ready. The girl told her she had done an excellent job. Now looking around, our heroine thought that there was no longer any visible danger, so she did everything she could. At that moment, the butler approached our heroine and said that the Duke would be ready soon, so she should go upstairs. The girl said she understood and was about to head to her room, but suddenly she stopped. The butler, surprised, asked what had happened. Our heroine pointed to the carpet and said that the material looked flimsy, so ladies in high heels could slip and fall. Looking at the butler, she begged him to hurry. Of course, the man could say nothing but agree. And yet our heroine herself realized how strange and fussy it all seemed to those around her. Even those who silently followed the instructions looked confused. With a heavy sigh, the girl told herself they could think whatever they wanted. It was definitely better than losing Agrita and then having to renovate the mansion. She certainly didn't care what they thought of her. The most important thing was to prevent Agrita's death, and she had to figure out what the problem was. Soon our heroine was walking to her room, and thinking that before she broke the bead, she came to the conclusion that there must be something wrong with Agrita. If it's true that the world really wants to get rid of the main character, then this world has some kind of problem, and maybe it even lies in the heroine herself. In reality, the problem could lie in both. It's very difficult to deal with global challenges on your own. It's important to keep a close eye on everything. One way or another, the main character needs to be kept a close eye on most. Our heroine must maintain order throughout the entire banquet. At that moment, Essie turned to her sister and asked if she was nervous. The girl, in a heavy voice, said that she was very nervous. She thought to herself and decided that she had no reason to worry. Standing in front of the entrance, she realized that she was attending the banquet with Essie as a member of his family, but she couldn't say that it was because of Agrita. The girl suddenly smiled sweetly at her brother, telling him to tremble with delight. Today he would come of age. Essie just looked at his sister in bewilderment and remained silent. She didn't understand why he was silent and hoped he understood what she was saying. Either way, the butlers opened the doors, and soon they were back inside. Lydia was sure she'd succeed this time. Upon entering, just like last time, all the guests began greeting the Duke and Princess Lydia. Everyone commented on how much they would be most pleased to meet them. They told them they always looked so beautiful, as if they'd stepped out of paintings. All the girls, by the way, shyly congratulated the Duke on his 18th birthday. The meeting looked no different from the last time, and there shouldn't have been an accident this time. Then she turned her head and noticed Agrita, realizing that nothing had changed since Agrita had returned that day. Of course, it was impossible not to notice Essie's indifference to the heroine, but wait, was Agrita really coming towards them? Was she going to come up and say hello to Essie? Does it matter when the heroine dies? Right now, Agrita's survival is paramount, so she'd like to be careful, but… At that moment, Alex approached her, and they discussed something with Agrita, shortly after which they bowed to each other. Immediately after this conversation, the girl turned and began to walk away. Our heroine simply looked at her in bewilderment, not understanding where she was going. At that moment, Lydia caught herself thinking that Agrita should go out to the backyard, passing through the center of the hall. Before discussing sponsorship, Essie initially asked her name. They almost hit it off, but it seemed the moment was lost. Charity, Lydia wondered what was wrong with it. Agrita was heading into the garden anyway, so Lydia decided to find a tree or bush to hide behind. Still, she wouldn't want a situation to occur in which the heroine of the novel falls on a rock and dies. Initially, Essie was supposed to follow her, but looking at her brother, now Lydia wasn't sure that he would. That was why she had no choice but to follow her herself. After some time, our heroine quietly made her way to the exit, and opening the door, her eyes widened. Our heroine saw Agrita, sitting in front of her, looking at the full moon. Lydia, as planned, hid behind a tree, but all this time she was thinking whether she should continue to follow or go up. She couldn't read minds, but did that mean she could spy on Agrita? Still, she decided she should approach her and talk to her. At that moment, Agrita sighed heavily and took off her shoes, saying that they were most likely made of poor quality material. However, she couldn't understand why her legs hurt so much if they were so expensive, or maybe it was all because of her weak body. Our heroine was perplexed. She immediately wondered if Agrita was such a person. Of course, everything she knew about the novel's heroine she read in the book. But then again, even celebrities can be completely different. Off camera, I should have stopped being afraid and just approached her. At that moment, Agrita, perplexed, asked when she could return. She didn't have a cell phone, so she couldn't even find her way back. Our heroine, who was eavesdropping on Agrita, was perplexed by what she had just said. Finally making up her mind, Lydia approached Agrita and asked what mobile phone she was talking about. The girl screamed in horror and asked in bewilderment who she was and whether she had really heard everything she said. Somehow, she still knew she should answer the question, so she said it was the name of a toy she played with as a child. Our heroine whispered to Agrita whether she was from a country called Korea by any chance. The girl instantly jumped up from her seat and, grabbing Lydia's hand, joyfully asked if she was also from Korea. She looked happily at our heroine and asked if she was really Korean too. Agrita was incredibly happy to see her compatriot, especially in such a place. She had been feeling lonely, but now she feels much better. Then she apologized for being so energetic. She was just surprised and very happy. Our heroine, however, didn't understand what was happening. That book didn't mention Agrita being Korean. It definitely didn't mention it. Perhaps Agrita really did remember her past life? The author might have simply not mentioned it. In any case, how would she cope with this situation? At this point, Agrita approached our heroine and asked how she got here. And again, the girl stopped thinking that she had started talking nonsense. But all this was because she was too happy. Agrita looked at Lydia with admiration and still asked how she got to this place because it was written about in one book. Lydia felt uneasy about these words. Was she from Korea? Or maybe she was just Korean? There were too many questions, and they were too poignant to answer. Instead of simply talking about the reason for reincarnation, she should are. At that moment, Agrita interrupted her thoughts. The girl happily said that she should probably tell first, before asking questions. Anyway, she said she didn't have an interesting story. When she went to the dining room, she went down the stairs. However, this staircase was wet and slippery, but she was careless and accidentally slipped. Just a moment later, as soon as she opened her eyes, she found herself in this place. Lydia asked in confusion if she had just been walking down the stairs fallen and opened her eyes here. Agrita said it was all true, and then asked if it wasn't strange. That's what she thought too. She'd found herself in a romance she'd only recently heard about. Our heroine let out a surprised cry. Agrita asked what was wrong with her little sister, then said she would call her sister. She really did look like her sister. At some point, they woke up in an unfamiliar place, in a strange body. They were now in a fictional world, and she had become the main character. Lydia, perplexed, asked if she really wasn't real. Agrita scratched her head in surprise and said that she was definitely not the real Agrita. After all, it was just the name of the owner of this body. The girl smiled and said her name was Ari Shin Ari. She then asked the new guest her name as well. Lydia didn't understand what was going on. However, she knew that she and Agrita had arrived in this world differently, and that's why our heroine said she wasn't like Ari. The girl said she didn't suddenly end up here. Life in Korea was her past life, but after she died, she was reborn here. Ari asked in surprise, "Does that mean she's from here?" So she knows Korea, or rather, she just remembers her past life. And again, Agrita joyfully began asking how this had happened. It was amazing. Our heroine, however, knew she had nothing to add since Agrita was saying everything that was on her mind. Lydia turned to Agrita, then apologized and asked Ari when she woke up in this body. The girl thought for a moment and said it had happened quite recently, about 4 days ago. This means that not long ago, Ari entered Agrita's body, and in the meantime, Agrita began to die in a variety of ways. What if the problem was Ari all along? In other words, because someone else has inhabited the protagonist's body, this world is trying to kill her. Shin-Ari, unfortunately, has entered Agrita's body, and from the world's point of view, she is a stranger here. Just as the human body rejects foreign bodies, this world seems to be killing Ari to get rid of her. Lydia realized each time it was sheer madness. Was Agrita really going to be killed anyway? In any case, she decided that if Agrita died and Ari's soul returned to her world, what would become of the real protagonist? Surely she would think she was dead. Ari had been trying to reach our heroine this whole time, asking if she was okay. Lydia, in turn, had only become convinced that this world was crazy. The girl suddenly turned to Ari and asked if she could ask him about one thing. Ari happily agreed and said she could ask any questions. Lydia wondered how she knew they were in a novel. Had she really found the book back in Korea? The girl thought for a moment, then said that at first she knew nothing. After she woke up in this body, she wandered around the area all day, so she accidentally went into the library and looked through several books there. Thus she learned about everything by reading one of them. The title of the book is The Spring of the Goddess Agrita. Our heroine said it was true, so everything pointed to Ari being caught up in the novel. She immediately assumed she was the main character. The girl also said that to some extent this body has memories, and she tries very hard to pretend to be Agrita. Our heroine realized she had decided to follow the plot using the body's owner's memories. Now it became clear why she was attending the banquet in this form. Anyway, Ari at that moment said that she was wondering if she would be able to return home by acting in this way. Lydia looked at this bright face in bewilderment and did not understand how she could say that she had already died 3 times. At this point, Ari said she wanted to know if she was doing everything right. So far, everything had gone smoothly and without problems, and she intended to continue doing so in the future. Lydia looked at her and thought of only one thing. Could she be sure that this world was killing Agrita to drive Ari from her body? It was the only option. There was only one thing they could do to solve the problem. They had to return Ari to her own world. But how? If the girl were transported to Korea, would Agrita be able to return to her body? She still didn't understand whether it would be better or not. At that moment, Ari turned to our heroine and asked if there was a pond here. Was there just a garden here? Lydia asked, surprised, what a pond had to do with it. The girl replied that they'd figured out that their travel circumstances were different. It was nice meeting you, but she'd forgotten to put on her shoes in all the chaos. The girl said she should put on her shoes, but she thought she'd better wash her feet first. That's why she wanted to know where the pond was, maybe. Our heroine guessed he might be in the courtyard. Ari, in that case, thanked the girl and headed there. However, at that very moment, the girl remembered that she couldn't just let her go alone. Lydia ran to her, telling her that it was all dangerous and that she didn't want her to go there. Ari, perplexed, asked if the pond was really that dangerous. Our heroine told her it was dangerous for her. Ari would go there barefoot and get stung by an ant, and ants can be poisonous. Ari, however, said that everything was fine because she was just going there to rinse her feet. She didn't understand why she had to be so careful, because even if she fell into the water, she could swim, but at that very moment, the girl slipped on the grass, which was slippery because of the water, and fell into the water. The depth of the reservoir was not that great, but for Ari at this time, absolutely everything was dangerous. Our heroine couldn't let her die, so she took off her shoes and jumped into the water asking Agrita to wait a minute. Lydia, fortunately, had learned to swim quickly, and of course there was no one else to save Agrita. Swimming up to the girl, our heroine asked her to be calm, because everything could turn out much worse. Our heroine must have saved at least someone from drowning. When rescuing someone from drowning, it was important to consider that they would become exhausted and eventually lose their strength. Lydia knew she had to save her, but what should she do? What was the first thing that came to mind? While Lydia was thinking about how to save the girl, she didn't even notice how she needed help too. Yet at that very moment, someone reached out to her and grabbed her. It was like a ray of salvation. In just a moment, our heroine found herself on the ground and was now just calmly coughing. Raising her head, the girl saw Essie in front of her, who ran to her aid. Looking at his face, she assumed that he was very angry at this moment. And by the way, more than ever. Lydia, however, only coughed anxiously, and with her last strength begged her brother to help Lady Agrita. Without further ado, the boy stood up and pulled his sword from its holster. Our heroine didn't understand what he was doing. After some time, she woke up in her bed, or rather, even jumped up in horror. Almost immediately, the girl realized that she was in her bed and in her nightgown. But what about Agrita? The last thing she remembers is Essie suddenly drawing his sword and heading towards the pond. At that moment, the girl felt someone's quiet breathing and became very scared. Turning her head, she looked at her brother in bewilderment and asked him what he was doing here. The guy nevertheless put his hand on her head and pinned her to the pillow again, saying that she should get some more sleep. Lydia, of course, couldn't fall asleep without asking what was troubling her most. She wanted to know what had happened to Agrita. Essie told her that if his sister wanted anything, no matter what, he would do anything. However, he couldn't help but say that he was a little angry this time. Our heroine immediately clasped her hands in anxiety. When she met Essie by the pond, she immediately thought he was angry, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. The girl understood that she had made her brother worry, so she could not help but apologize to him. But she's his little sister after all. While Essie is the only one who cares, and yet she gets angry. But still, she's not his blood sister. She's the one he'll simply kill according to the novel's plot. The girl understood that this was a completely natural future, but why did her heart feel so heavy again? If she were to ask her brother now about Agrita's well-being, he would definitely not answer her. Just then, he touched his sister, and stroking her head, asked her to go to sleep quickly and wake up quickly. She would think about the rest in the morning. And finally, morning arrived. Our heroine, as soon as she opened her eyes, jumped up incredibly quickly. Could it all have been a dream? The last thing she saw was talking to Essie, but she wasn't sure if it was a dream or reality. Yet she jumped out of bed again as soon as she remembered Agrita. What had happened to her? As soon as our heroine got out of bed, Ari ran straight into her arms. Lydia, perplexed, asked what had happened. Following her into the room came Bessie and the doctor, who were incredibly glad that the lady had already woken up. The maid said that she was very worried, and the doctor began to follow her and ask Lydia how she was feeling. Our heroine wanted to say everything was fine, but the situation amused her. The doctor was checking her pulse, and Ari was clinging to her. Agrita looked at her, and with tears in her eyes spoke about how scared she was. Our heroine said she understood her, and she was also glad to feel her warmth under her palm, alive. Essie did save her after all? But why then did he draw his sword at the last moment? Ari, clinging to Lydia like a teddy bear, asked her sister, what if that pond was cursed? She didn't expect to fall. Either way, she wanted to know what was wrong with him, and also that she should have listened to Lydia when she tried to warn her. The doctor suddenly said her leg had cramped in the water, and then something had grabbed her ankle. She wouldn't have been able to get out on her own. Ari said she thought she was going to die there. Apparently, she was entangled in the seaweed, and that's why Essie pulled out his sword. He was trying to cut through the seaweed. Our heroine understood that this was somehow peaceful and altruistic. Knowing the other side of my brother, it was strange that a man who had killed several people suddenly decided to do a good deed. However, at that moment, the doctor said that, fortunately, the lady was fine. If it weren't for the Duke, by the way, Lydia would have been in trouble. Bessie echoed these words when talking about this surprise. No matter how many people fell for this trick, she wanted to know what would happen if the lady jumped blind. Ari clung even closer to her sister, telling her it was true, it was too dangerous. Anyway, She sheepishly apologized, telling them all that it was her fault. Our heroine, one way or another, said it was her decision to jump after him. Bessie was very angry about this, but the doctor, looking at her, said they were all very worried about her. He also said that the Duke had been the most worried of all, as he hadn't even really rested and had been watching her the whole time. He had only fallen asleep a short while ago. Concerned and serious, Bessie told the lady that they would be there, and that even if they asked her to come in, she would have to obey. Lydia suddenly realized she hadn't dreamed it all. Essie had indeed stayed by her side all night. It meant he was so responsive. Even though they were family, she certainly couldn't find someone like him. Since the gentleman and his wife passed away, many years have passed since they were left alone. Bessie approached the lady and asked her to take care of herself, because they would have done the same. But still, it was worth thinking about the Duke as well. The maid held Lydia's hands and told her that the Duke truly cared about her. Lydia felt Bessie's voice was soft and sincere, yet somehow ironic. After listening to their sincere request, she realized even more clearly why she would have to die. Essie, who doesn't value others, is the only one who can give a heart, and he only has a sister left. But still, in turn, the guy also thinks that his sister is the only and special person for him, and without a doubt, she gives her love. Yet how would he feel when he found out it was all a lie? She assumed he would never let her live. Anyway, at that moment, the doctor approached Bessie, and after pushing her a little, asked her to stop making things up. He told her the lady hadn't fallen into the pond on purpose, but she continued to grumble. Bessie, perplexed, asked him if he needed to pick on her now. The doctor, perplexed, asked what it was. If not grumbling, Bessie was already very angry. But at that moment, Lydia intervened and asked them not to argue. She stepped between them and reminded them that she was fine, so there was no point in arguing. She was fine and Bessie was right. She would be careful in the future. Immediately after this, Bessie's face changed, and she happily said that if the lady was already awake, she should definitely wash herself, so she would bring hot water. Lydia agreed, but said she'd be fine with cold water. The doctor suddenly offered some advice. She could easily fill the bathtub with water, and not just cold water, by the way. Bessie headed towards the exit anyway, and told them to just wait until the water heated up. In that case, the doctor also said that he would go. And if the lady felt unwell, she could call him at any time. And by the way, he asked her not to do any self-diagnosis, and not to perceive it as something trivial or unimportant. It's dangerous. As soon as everyone left, our heroine turned her head and noticed Ari on the bed, who definitely made it clear that she wanted to stay next to Lydia. Nevertheless, our heroine smiled at her, and opening the door, said that they would see each other later in the dining room, which of course meant asking her to leave. Still, Ari left, and now, having closed the door behind everyone, the girl decided that she could rest a little and be alone with herself. And again, a shudder ran through our heroine's body as she began to think about Ari. Would everything be okay with her? She immediately opened the door to investigate who had come to see her, so she carefully stuck her head out of the doorway. In the corridor, she saw a butler who was asking the lady if everything was all right with her. The girl told him she was fine, but his expression changed instantly. He immediately asked why she jumped into the water. He wondered if she really thought it was impossible to drown in a pond. Also, that it wasn't something to be taken so lightly. Blah, blah, blah. And then a huge storm of lectures. Lydia couldn't even get a word in edgewise, and she knew it was pure grumbling. Her head hurt, so she wanted to be left alone. After that, the butler grumbled nonstop. Our heroine literally couldn't stand it all, so she fled the room. Afterwards, the Grace family paid them a visit, and together, they thanked the Widgreen family for saving their daughter. Lydia was even embarrassed by this, so she said that everything was fine, so there was no need to thank her. Still, looking back, it was actually kind of funny. She could still feel the chill of the water, and Essie was the one who saved Agrita. Anyway, Agrita's parents thanked them endlessly, and soon left, arriving just after she woke up. What madness! Finally, sitting down on the sofa, our heroine decided that she needed to collect her thoughts. In any case, Agrita is now unconditionally doomed to die. But who is killing her? The world. And why? Because this isn't the real Agrita. This isn't the real protagonist of the novel. No matter how much Shinari infiltrated Agrita's body, the world is now trying to kill her to get her out of here. Just think, a 10-star celebratory party. Secondly, Our heroine was interested in whether it was possible to save Agrita, who was destined to die. Perhaps it was possible, but she's far from saving Agrita. Lydia actually accompanies her on her journey to the underworld. In other words, she definitely couldn't cope alone, so she needed help, but she was still really glad that she could be saved. Lydia mentally turned to the current Agrita, or rather, even to Ari, and asked her for help. She would like to confess to her everything that has accumulated in her heart, but nevertheless, the problem is that she is not sure of her feelings. All she needs is for Agrita to attract Essie's attention, all in order to safely leave the mansion. There's another problem, though. Essie was drawn to Agrita only because she was Agrita. Now that she was no longer the real Agrita, Ari had no idea what would happen next. And overall, our heroine was doubtful Essie was next to her while she slept, which meant he sat next to her all night. If everything had gone according to the plot, Essie would have seen Agrita and fallen in love with her at first sight. So Essie would have ended up with Agrita last night, not her. Everything was too ambiguous, and this greatly upset our heroine. One way or another, she decided to think positively. The only thing she could count on now was Agrita. Without her, she'll die without fulfilling her plan. She's genuinely afraid of dying during the escape. And besides, Essie isn't someone to fall in love with. However, despite the events differing from the book's plot, Essie still saved Agrita. Even if it wasn't love at first sight, there's still hope. In that case, there's only one thing left for her now. Just then, Bessie walked into the room and asked how things were. She offered to bring her something to eat. Bessie asked if she should have food brought to her room. Lydia smiled and asked the maid to set the table in the dining room so she could eat there. Even as she walked to the dining room, our heroine thought she needed to tell Ari everything. She needed to know why she was getting into trouble. She's in the dark now, but they can at least avoid anything that might pose a danger to her. The only question was how to make her trust her. That was the most difficult question. At that moment, our heroine was pulled out of her thoughts by the joyful cries of Ari, who was calling her sister and saying that she was here. The butler asked Milady to forgive him, but it was customary to speak more respectfully when dealing with aristocrats. Ari looked at him in bewilderment. Lydia thought that this butler allowed this only in relation to her, but he doesn't care at all who he lectures. Suddenly, our heroine noticed some unknown flying object near the butler. What the hell is that? After taking a closer look, the girl screamed in horror, saying that there was a bee in the building. The maid cried out in horror, and the other began waving her hand, bewildered that they were here again. However, our heroine understood that there was nothing surprising about a bee simply flying, because it could have simply flown in from the front garden or across the road. At that moment, the girl thought for a moment, and a moment later, she screamed in bewilderment, asking to catch her because she was poisonous. She began to rush the maids and butlers, saying that they should hurry, because if they were bitten, they would die on the spot. This bee looked so ordinary, everyone was confused. But Lydia could be sure, if there was a bee near Ari, something was definitely wrong. Lydia knew she had to take on the bee too, so she needed to stand closer to Ari. She couldn't touch anything poisonous, so she needed to figure out how to catch the bee. However, at that moment, a bee began to fly towards Ari, so the girl fell into a stupor and only screamed in horror. Soon there was a loud bang, after which a chopped-up bee fell to the ground. The unknown guy stepped onto the floor and apologized to Miss saying that he barely made it in time. The young man apologized for the delay, but once he returned, he didn't leave his duty for a moment. He was ordered to accompany her. He introduced himself as Darbury, a loyal knight of the family. He is the Widgreen family's attendant knight. Then he smiled and said that he had overslept. Darbury asked not to tell the gentleman about it. After that, he asked what his punishment would be. After all, he deserved it, or at least he thought he should have. Our heroine, seeing him, almost with tears in her eyes, and with great bewilderment, greeted him. A maid approached him, saying she hadn't even known he was there. Still, the knight's skills were still impressive, since he was able to cut down such a tiny bee. Speaking of the bee, the butler, perplexed, asked if it was truly poisonous. As soon as Darbury heard this, he cried out, asking how that could have happened. The doctor, who had just arrived, was also very surprised and wanted to take a closer look at the bee. The man suddenly asked in horror where it had come from. He confirmed that this bee is highly toxic. They were lucky enough to encounter such a rare and poisonous insect. He explained that if she had literally stung him, he definitely wouldn't have survived. Anyway, he asked if everyone was alive and well. Lydia confirmed his words and said that everything was relatively fine. Although one way or another, Ari almost died. And right now, she was scared to death. Our heroine was asked how she even found out this information, because if it weren't for Lady and Sir Darbury, everything could have ended very badly. Lydia, however, did not answer the question, and only turned to Agrita, saying that she needed to talk to her for a short while. After a while, they were already walking, but our heroine was so shocked that she simply couldn't find words. Just yesterday, she nearly died from drowning, and today from a bee stings. Although the girl understood that this was also a good opportunity for her, if she told everything now, Ari would be more willing to believe her. At that moment, Darbury appeared behind them, who said that it was poison at first glance. The bee looked normal, but in the future, he asked that the bees in the mansion be killed immediately. Our heroine was terrified to imagine how long he would follow them. Lydia suddenly turned and addressed the knight accompanying her. The young man, surprised, asked how he could be of service. Our heroine explained to him that she had something to talk about with Lady Agrita, and asked him to wait for them outside the door. Darbury, nevertheless, said a confident no. He explained that he had been ordered not to leave them for a second. Lydia told him that the topic of their conversation was very important. In that case, the guy said they could hit him. If he told anyone, Lydia completely forgot about Sir Darbury's excessive resourcefulness. Unfortunately, our heroine was completely powerless against Essie's order. Why on earth did he give that order? Lydia continued to scream in confusion, saying that it was no longer possible to have a calm conversation in her own mansion. Darbury said he'd cover his ears. Our heroine couldn't believe that she was going to say such a thing. But at that moment, she asked in surprise if it was true that he would still hear everything with his ears closed. Lydia still didn't want to do it. But then she asked him what he thought would happen to him for disobeying her. The girl said she'd tell Essie everything. Something like, due to Sir Darbury's carelessness, she almost died. The boy cried out in bewilderment, and our heroine asked him if he could live to see the sun after such words. It would be nice to see the moon, too. Darbury immediately started asking her to wait a minute because it was all a lie. There was no excuse for being late, but he almost got stung himself. Lydia waved her hand and asked him what difference it made. Who would Essie be most likely to believe? Now Darbury realized he had no way to counter it. Finally, our heroine said that she likes talented people like him, so she hopes that he will continue to serve for the benefit of their family for a long time. Soon the girls closed the door behind them, leaving Darbury outside. Lydia silently apologized to him and asked him to understand as lives depended on it. At that moment, the girls sat down at the table. Our heroine suggested to Ari that if she was hungry, she should have a snack first and then talk. The girl told her that she didn't want to because she wanted to eat, but for some reason her appetite had completely disappeared. Ari tried to calmly take the cup of water and drink it without saying a word. However, she immediately slammed her hand on the table and asked in bewilderment how the bee could be poisonous. It couldn't possibly be that dangerous. She soon began screaming and expressing her bewilderment as she had nearly died. Lydia only smiled sweetly, realizing that what she had been waiting for had finally begun. However, her reasoning continued for a long time. Lydia couldn't find the right moment to intervene in the conversation. At this point, Ari said that if she thought about it, she had also been strangely unlucky at the pond yesterday. She suggested it might be some kind of curse, or that it wasn't the pond, but actually the mansion. She immediately apologized for her crude assumptions. Lydia was delighted because she'd said it very well. The girl assured her that everything was correct, but Ari interrupted her again, apologizing for her behavior. She remembered that Lydia wanted to tell her something, but nevertheless, she said that she was much younger than Lydia. The girl said she was 17. Our heroine, hearing this number, was incredibly shocked. Agrita continued saying that according to local reckoning, it was 16, or even more likely 15 since she was born in winter. Our heroine was perplexed. She couldn't believe it was true. How could she be only 15 years old? Ari suddenly said she slipped on the stairs at school, and it seemed it was the day of the practice exam. After taking the test, she was too nervous. So because of all this, and because of her haste, she was too careless and an accident happened. Anyway, she apologized again, saying that her sister wanted to talk to her about something. Nevertheless, Lydia was already in shock at being only 15. The words she should have uttered just a moment ago now stuck in her throat. She was destined to die, and if she wanted to avoid her fate, she had to be extremely careful. Before she realized the situation, Lydia was trying to save her in every way possible. Because she needed her, Ari turned to her sister and asked if everything was okay. Our heroine had to save Agrita for her own future, and yet she had to say it. The girl continued to call her sister and Lydia. In turn bit her lip, collecting her thoughts. Still mustering her courage, she turned to the girl and asked if she wanted to live. Confused, Ari asked again, and our heroine asked her to choose. After some time, our heroine was walking down the corridor, feeling very depressed. At that moment, Sir Darby approached her and covered her with his hand because Lydia was walking straight into the wall. He told her, puzzled, that he didn't want to die, so if she was angry, she should have used words. At that moment, the girl only slowly turned her head towards Darby and did not say a word. In the same way, she silently turned around and headed straight ahead again, so that he wouldn't bother her with his questions. Our heroine told Agrita about the situation she was in, but not in order to continue saving hers. Lydia said that if she died, her soul might return to its original world. Still, she didn't know how realistic it was, but it was up to her to decide whether to take advantage of this opportunity. Now the choice was hers. If she wanted to defy this world's will and fight for her life, she would help it. But if she decided to give up, she promised not to interfere. The girl hit herself on the head in bewilderment, telling herself that she had gone crazy. She's the kind of person who doesn't care about others. So when did she become so conscientious? She was so rational, even when she was stealing beads. However, once she met Ari, she could not bear the wave of guilt and remorse. Her conviction that she had to keep her alive for the sake of her plan simply vanished. She knew she was weak when it came to children. She silently screamed and said that this could drive her crazy. Now her future depended on Agrita's decision. She would lose the opportunity to change her future if Ari chose to accept death. Having said goodbye to her, she would have to prepare for a dark and tragic end. After all, she had started this whole mess herself, so she had no one to blame. At that moment, Bessie approached our heroine, handing her some honey water. She intended to take it to the Duke's bedroom, so he could drink it when he woke up. The maid asked that this request be fulfilled in her stead, and that the water be taken to the Duke. Lydia, perplexed, asked her again. Bessie, however, smiled sweetly and said that, in that case, they would see each other at the same time. Lydia knew her brother was asleep, so why would she visit a sleeping man? At that moment, Darby turned to her and said she could entrust the matter to him. Our heroine declined his offer, saying everything was fine. In any case, she kept him up all night. By the way, the girl didn't even remember the last time she entered Essie's room, much less after her parents' death. Having already approached the Duke's room, although she understood that he was sleeping for the sake of decency, she decided to knock. At that moment, a voice came from inside the room, asking the girl to come in. What? Was he really awake? Entering the room, she saw her brother in front of her, who was sitting at the table and looking at documents. Soon he finally raised his head, and noticing his sister, asked in surprise why she had come. Did she really have some business for him? The girl quickly handed him the water, saying she had come to give him something. More specifically, this honey water. Essie, surprised, asked why Bessie had asked someone to bring it and only caused herself trouble. He soon put the water down. Apparently, he wasn't going to drink it. He then asked his sister how she was feeling. She said she was fine, healthy, light, and had slept well. Essie was pleased to hear this. However, our heroine noticed his intense gaze, which made it clear that he himself was wondering whether she was telling the truth. In any case, the girl decided that she should change the subject, so she asked her brother what was wrong with him, since she heard that he had not rested all night. She thought he must be asleep now. But then why was he so busy? Essie explained that if he worked in the office, the butler would bother him. Our heroine understood what he was talking about, but that wasn't what interested her. She wanted to know if he was tired. Essie, at this point, told his sister that he was not at all so tired that he wanted to sleep. Lydia asked in surprise if he wasn't tired. She could see he looked quite alert, but he'd said he hadn't slept at all. At that moment, Essie reached out to his sister and, adjusting a lock of her hair, suggested that it was windy outside. Lydia jumped in horror. He'd scared her too much, and in the end, he'd simply straightened her hair. But by the way, about her hair, she never went out, and the reason her hair was disheveled was when she was terrified and furious. She immediately realized with horror that she'd been walking around with disheveled hair all this time, which meant Sir Darbury could at least have told her about it. He really only does security. Lydia finally decided to talk about the weather, but suddenly stopped and, perplexed, asked her brother why he was lying to her. Essie asked again, perplexed. The girl told him that he says he is not tired, but this is not true because he speaks much slower than usual. As a child, Essie also spoke more slowly when he was tired. Of course, it's not that easy to understand, but she easily recognized her brother's mood even then. He may have grown taller, but what's surprising is that he still has the same habit he had as a child. Even a psychopathic villain has a sweet side. The boy asked his sister how she realized this, since he thought it wasn't that obvious. She told him that, as soon as she listened to him, it immediately became clear. However, Essie smiled sweetly and said that only she knew about this side of him. Anyway, the guy said he wasn't lying. It wasn't that he wasn't tired. He just wasn't tired enough to fall asleep. Our heroine, however, pointed out that he'd said he hadn't gotten any rest at all that night. He told her everything was fine, so there was no need to worry. One way or another, he understood that she couldn't help but worry, so he nevertheless took the glass in his hands and drank everything that was inside. Our heroine looked at him in surprise and asked if his throat was dry. He'd literally drunk it all in one go. Essie laughed and told his sister that this sometimes happens when you are very thirsty. Lydia looked at him in bewilderment and wondered if he'd caught a cold. When you're sick, your throat suddenly goes dry. Anyway, the girl said that he hadn't slept all night, which is why his throat was now dry. Even though he assured her that he was fine, his condition still said something completely different. At that moment, the guy turned to his sister and asked her directly if she liked Agrita Grace. Our heroine looked at him in surprise, not understanding what he meant, so she decided to ask. The boy smiled sweetly as he looked at his sister and soon asked her if he should make a doll out of her. The girl immediately screamed, telling him that was out of the question. Essie asked why, and Lydia was shocked that he was even asking that. He explained to her that it would be more comfortable this way, and that she would not be able to move at will, so she would not fall into the pond again. In that case, he wouldn't jump after her either. His face twisted strangely at these words. Our heroine instantly caught herself thinking that her brother was probably scolding her for jumping into the water. At this point, Essie began to stand up and tell his sister that she could do whatever she wanted and he was not going to interfere. Soon he approached her and added that if something happened to her, he would not leave the others alone. Finally, he added that that was all she needed to know. Our heroine now understood that he would kill someone if she was harmed. The girl nevertheless decided to clarify and ask who he meant by the word "the rest." The guy explained to her that by this he meant everyone except her, of course. After a while, our heroine emerged from the Duke's office. Darbury immediately approached Lydia and asked her if she had passed the honey water. Looking at Sir Darbury with bitterness, she whispered that this was another life dependent on her. The boy asked again, perplexed. Our heroine said that everything was fine, but Essie's voice was still ringing in her head. Some thoughts had once crossed her mind. What if she were Essie's real older sister? Could she say with a smile on her face that her brother was just a bit of an impulsive person? Could she truly rejoice at all the excessive care from her brother? Every time he singles her out and addresses her differently, like this time she has no choice but to put herself in the shoes of people who are strangers to him. It's all because this is her true place. She may still be part of this family, but sooner or later they'll get rid of her. They'll accuse her of pretending to be something she's not. Our heroine understood that the price of this was nothing less than death. At that moment, Darbury approached the girl and asked her in surprise why she had stopped. The girl understood that there was no point in delving into such dark thoughts, so she decided to ask Darbury what family relationships meant to him. The girl asked how much his family meant to him. At that moment, the guy thoughtfully mentioned that he didn't have one. Lydia was overcome with shock. Our heroine forgot that Sir Darbury was once an orphan and wandered the back streets, and Essie in turn recognized his talent and brought him along. The girl immediately began to apologize, saying that she had not said it on purpose because she was simply curious what other people thought about it. Darbury smiled and said he'd answer her later, once he got married, and started a family. Lydia told him not to go that far. Lydia, however, was already feeling too uncomfortable. Darbury suddenly said that if he had a younger sister, he would always protect her. Our heroine asked again, surprised. Sir Darbury said he would likely fulfill his sister's every whim within his means, unless of course she wished him dead. Lydia suddenly asked why he would protect his younger sister. The guy said he wouldn't consider his younger brother cute. And by the way, he said that this applies to his older brother as well, but he should think about his older sister Lydia, decided she'd heard biased and discriminatory remarks. Darbury nevertheless asked what was wrong, since they didn't exist anyway. Lydia then asked why he thought his younger sister was cute, just because she was his sister? The guy said that first of all, since she is his sister, it means that she looks like him, and that she is very beautiful. Soon he began to list a million factors and character traits that would suit her sister. She would be perfect in many ways. Our heroine, perplexed, asked if this was all just his fantasy. Darbury, surprised, asked the lady what fantasy she was talking about. The guy said he'd been waiting for someone to ask him about it and kept these thoughts to himself. He can't tell he wants to, but then everyone will know his weaknesses. Still, he felt it was unfair, since he'd described a very realistic image of his sister. Based on existing factors, Lydia tried to interrupt him. She held up an imaginary object, saying she'd found something on the floor of the mansion earlier, and it seemed to be his conscience. Darbury laughed and said that couldn't be true. Our heroine then asked if it could be his shame. The guy smiled and said he didn't know whose it was, but that person was so confused. Lydia even forgot about him for a while since she hadn't seen him for almost a year. But still, Darbury really is that kind of person. At that point, Darbury interrupted her and asked what about her. He wondered how important family was to her. Our heroine immediately became thoughtful, because if you think about it, she too is an orphan. She has no blood relatives in this mansion. Even if her real family does exist somewhere, she will never know about it. Realizing she couldn't say anything better than that her family was as important to her as heaven and earth, Darbury asked in surprise if that was really the answer. He then said that, although he did not have a younger sister, he still had a person who replaced her. Our heroine looked at him in surprise, hoping it wasn't a declaration of love. More likely, he simply considered her his little sister. However, she didn't know what to answer him, so she decided to tell him that someday she would find out about his feelings, so he should hold on. Out of curiosity, she decided to ask what kind of person she was. Sir Darbury said that everything he had said above largely fit the description. Our heroine, perplexed, assumed he was talking about that imaginary little sister. Does she even exist? Darbury, perplexed, said she wasn't imaginary, but a real person. Our heroine sighed and said she hadn't said anything like that. One way or another, they reached the lady's room. Lydia suddenly asked if he would really follow her into the room because of his orders. The guy said that the exception was places with guaranteed security or personal use, so he would not enter. Our heroine suggested that in that case, while she was in the room, he could rest. Darbury immediately thought about it, as he hadn't thought about it. Lydia understood what his workload meant, so she told him to rest, and if she was going to go out somewhere, she would definitely call him. After some time, our heroine entered her room and happily lay down on her comfortable bed. Also, while she was lying and enjoying the comfortable bed, she remembered that she needed to put away all her things. However, she also caught herself thinking that she didn't want to move at all. The reason she returned to the room was that she needed to unpack the suitcase hidden in the closet and tidy up. She had originally wanted to take him with her when she was about to escape, but the situation had changed a bit, and it wouldn't be possible to do that right now. In that case, she decided that she could rest a little and then get down to her business. After some time, one of the maids woke the lady. Lydia, not even realizing how much time had passed, asked in confusion what had happened. The maid told her that Lady Agrita Grace wanted to meet her, so she asked to call her. Lydia was soon heading towards her. When they parted ways with Agrita, the worst fears had entered her mind. She worried that Ari would destroy this damned world. Yet fortunately, this did not happen, so she thought that Agrita had made a decision to live or die, and that Lydia's fate would also depend on this choice. At that moment, Ari turned to our heroine and asked her if she thought she was dead. Our heroine, perplexed, asked her again. The girl said she wasn't talking about Agrita Grace, but the real her. Did she really die after slipping on the stairs? After our heroine's story, she thought a lot. She said that after death, her soul could return to the original world. If that's really the case, then doesn't that mean she died in the original world, and that's why her soul ended up here? The stairs were too high. The girl started crying, saying she didn't want to think about it. But could she really be dead? She was only 17. She had so many plans. Ree said she didn't even pass the entrance exams and didn't get in. In any case, she didn't want to die. Our heroine was incredibly depressed, but in response to Ari's words, she merely mentally agreed with her. After her birth here, she remembered her past life. Either way, that life felt like a hazy past. If she were in the same situation, she'd feel the same way. A time when there were still so many things you hadn't done. A time when you look forward to your future life more than you reminisce about the days you've already lived. A wonderful age, to say the least. Ree was too young to cope with the sudden death that had befallen her. So Lydia silently embraced Agrita. Our heroine continued to comfort her in her arms for a long time. But not so much Agrita, but the crying 17-year-old Shin Ree, who did not want to die. After some time, the girl wiped away all her tears, and by that time she had already told everything. Lydia soon told the girl that she was counting on her Ari. In a calmer voice, said that she had hopes too. The girl decided to continue living as Agrita. In this situation, she truly had no other choice. Even if she returned, there was a high probability that her body was dead. Our heroine decided to help her survive, and she in turn decided to help her escape. At this point, Ari, surprised, said that she really didn't understand. Lydia asked what had happened. The girl screamed in horror and asked how anyone could kill such a kind and sweet person like Lydia. What a villain! Our heroine just smiled sweetly at her and said that she was certainly right. Ari, nevertheless, said that she would do everything possible to ensure a safe escape. She would charm the villain with her masterful seduction. Our heroine nevertheless wondered if Ari would be able to make good use of this. They had a more serious problem, and even if they used it, would their plan work? Essie's indifferent voice suddenly sounded in her head, suggesting that she make a doll out of Agrita. And he didn't waver for a second. She understood that the way he'd followed Ari to help her the previous evening, the way he'd saved her from drowning without hesitation, without a word, she saw hope in those actions. But this is just useless optimism because Essie is actually indifferent. Our heroine tried to control herself, but at that moment, she only sighed heavily. It was a well-known fact that Agrita was beautiful. Her fair skin, peachy red cheeks, and delicate features were the highlights. Her slender frame makes you want to take her under your protection, as well as her long and smooth hair, with her clear and sparkling eyes. She is elegant, pure, and innocent. Her attractive appearance once seen is certainly hard to forget. Looking at the mug of tea, our heroine wondered how she could use it all. After all, Essie needed to figure it all out on his own. However, Essie doesn't care about a person's appearance. His lack of interest in others means he's uninterested in their appearance. He never showed any interest in either beauties or those who were not. Instead, regardless of their appearance, he treated everyone equally. This seems to have been one of the factors that boosted Essie's popularity among women. People probably find it very attractive not to judge others by their appearance. Lydia needed another way to get Essie's attention. What could she come up with? Anyway, our heroine approached Ari and offered to give her a try. The girl happily agreed. Lydia was delighted that Ari had recovered so quickly from everything that had happened. She actively supported her offer of mutual assistance. Only thanks to this will our heroine be able to even try to survive. If not for Ari, who would she tell about her future, and with whom would she discuss what to do next? But there's something even more important than seduction. This and everything else is only possible if Ari stays alive. Their task was to rewrite this unfortunate fate. Our heroine asked Ari to stay by her side and follow her everywhere. The girl happily agreed. Lydia had to check something, but to do it, Ari would have to face danger a couple more times, but she couldn't let her suffer. Having put Ari's life in danger, she must be helped to survive. And for that, Sir Darbury is absolutely necessary. After a while, a vase fell to the ground and shattered into pieces. Cries of confusion followed. The maid, perplexed, said she didn't know how it had happened. In any case, she apologized, saying she was truly sorry. Darbury told her that everything was fine because no one was injured, so she didn't have to keep apologizing so much. This was to be expected from Sir Darbury. A flower pot had just nearly fallen on Ari's head, But the night had saved her, and now the clock reads 15 minutes past 12. Our heroine approached Ari and asked her if everything was okay. The girl said she was fine. She then turned to Darbury and thanked him for saving her. He said everything was fine. Lydia, however, noticed that they both looked scared. Anticipating danger and facing it head-on are two different things. Fortunately, Sir Darbury had already saved Ari's life twice that day. At that moment, the guy went to the maids, and our heroine decided that she needed to take advantage of the opportunity while he was gone. Our heroine immediately turned to Ari and asked him to listen carefully. The time when her life is in danger comes 3 times a day. Our heroine assumed it happened in the morning, afternoon, and evening. The first death was in the chapel in the morning, and another death was from an explosion downtown. In the third case, a chandelier fell, and in the fourth case, there was an incident with a pond in the evening. By the way, this was the 5th time there was an incident with a poisonous bee in the morning, and the last time just now was a flower pot that fell at lunchtime. So they have this information. Midnight dawn, the time between morning and lunch, or between lunch and dinner. She was never in danger during these times. Ah! Ree exclaimed in disbelief. Claiming it was true, Lydia said that if her suspicions were confirmed, her situation should improve significantly. However, just in case our heroine still asked me not to leave her side today, we need to check before dinner to be sure. At that moment, the girls heard strange screams behind them, so they turned around to find out what it was. Eventually, they noticed the maid who knelt down to apologize and Darbury, who assured her that everything was fine. Both our heroine and Ari decided to approach the tearful maid to tell her that everything was fine. The action shifts to evening. During Essie's 4-day coming-of-age ceremony and birthday banquet today was the 2nd day of celebration. Our heroine had completely forgotten about it because she spent all her time with Agrita without leaving her side. But Bessie came and she was suddenly overtaken by preening. After some time, the maid's work was completed, and Lydia again appeared in a chic image that emphasized her beauty. Ari, as soon as she saw her little sister, began to talk with delight on her face about how beautiful she was. Our heroine nevertheless decided to say that Agrita is also very beautiful, even though this is a well-known fact. Even though she lent Ari her clothes, because she had to stay here all day, they still suited her very well. The girl suddenly turned to Sir Darbury and asked if he thought the same. The guy thought for a moment, then said a hesitant, "Yes." Lydia immediately told him that his answer didn't sound sincere at all. Having started playing with all his might, the boy fell to his knees saying that they were both dazzling, that it was difficult for him to even look at them because he did not want to be dazzled. After a while, our heroine became thoughtful. Although she had suspected it, it seemed Essie still hadn't come down to the banquet hall. If he'd been planning to attend, he'd have arrived early to escort Lydia, so there was a high chance he wouldn't show up. Usually, if the celebration lasted several days, he would simply appear on the first day. According to the book, he was supposed to be present today to show interest in Agrita, but now it seems we can ignore what the book says altogether. According to the plot, he would have gotten rid of the 2 young men who invited Agrita to dance. Although it would be funny if Essie followed the book's plot when everything went wrong from the very beginning. Incidentally, it was now 6:30. Nothing had happened since the incident with the flower pot during lunch. The girl understood that the time was slowly approaching for a new threat to Ari's life. So what danger could await her? She removed from the banquet hall everything that could pose a threat to her life. Ari will not go outside now to take risks as she did yesterday. Suddenly, a stranger approached and bowed down, telling the lady that she was as dazzling as ever. Our heroine was of course very happy to hear this, but she asked him perplexed who he was. An awkward silence followed. The young man said he'd introduced himself to her last time, but she didn't seem to remember him. He was the eldest son of Count Kami Rigakami. He would be honored to meet her. Our heroine sheepishly said she was also glad to see Mr. Kami. The young man, however, expressed surprise that the Duke was somehow nowhere to be seen today. Lydia smiled and said that that was all because Essie was still busy with his own affairs. Riga suggested that being the head of a family is no easy task. Even for him, the training alone would be exhausting for successors. Our heroine didn't really understand who it was, and she probably wouldn't even remember him next time. At that moment, the guy offered her a glass of wine. Lydia extended her hand towards him, saying that she was grateful to him for his courtship, and therefore would agree. At that very moment, a loud cry was heard, commanding that the wine not be drunk. Soon the glass fell and shattered. The guy turned around in bewilderment and noticed Lady Donda in front of him. Either way, Riga glanced at her and asked what she was doing. She glared at him, wondering if it was really the right time to ask her what she was doing. Pointing at him, she asked what he was planning to do in turn. She knew he had poisoned that glass of wine. Riga, perplexed, asked what she was talking about, and the girl said that using the same method as last time, he decided to shamelessly act like nothing had happened. Riga, however, explained that it was a misunderstanding. He'd only helped a drunk woman at a banquet, and she'd misunderstood. So why do this to him now? Donda was furious and said that all this was absurd because he had added poison to the wine. Riga said in surprise that his mistake was not knowing that the girl had a poor tolerance for alcohol and allowing her to abuse it. But what poison were we talking about? The guy said he understood it was Lady Donda's friend, but her accusation was unfair. Our heroine didn't understand what was happening, but it was hard to tell from his face that he was lying. One way or another, she understood that time was slowly approaching, and this was a little... At this point, Darbury intervened to help in the conversation, asking the lady to ask something. The guy looked at her and asked if she knew what they'd put in it. Donda said she didn't know what it was called, only the effects after use. Her body is weakening, and her memory is partially lost. If she hadn't found her friend in time, it's scary to imagine what she might have gotten herself into. Thus, she insisted that everything Riga had said was a blatant lie. Riga screamed in bewilderment, and Darbury asked them to calm down. Sir Darbury decided to do what he thought was right, so he decided to ask for help. A short time later, Essie came down to the banquet hall. Our heroine was shocked to discover that by call for help, the knight meant calling Essie. Either way, she couldn't understand who was standing behind him. Why had he brought some guys with him? Essie first approached his sister and asked how she was feeling. Lydia told him everything was fine. Essie then said that he had already been informed of everything. Darbury apologized for disturbing the Duke and causing him inconvenience. The guy said it wasn't his fault. Meanwhile, Lydia continued to wonder who all these people were. Just then, Riga turned around and froze. He definitely knew these people. At this time, these guys said that they did not know what was going on, but they still apologized for being wrong and asked for mercy. Essie asked them to calm down, as he simply wanted to ask them one question. Do they remember all the types of substances sold and their buyers? Our heroine looked at him in surprise. What's going on now? What sold substances are we talking about, and who were the buyers? Darbury at this point seemed to figure out what the lady was thinking, so he said that all these people were drug dealers who were currently working. Essie meanwhile approached them even closer and asked if they remembered the man with whom they had made a deal about a week ago. Horrified, they raised their hand and pointed forward, saying that this gentleman was the one who had bought the drug from him a week ago. Their finger pointed toward Riga. The guy even fell to the ground from such statements, and Essie asked what kind of drug it was, and its effect. The merchant said it was colorless and odorless, slightly bitter. If you added it to alcohol, you'd barely notice it. After a certain amount of time, body temperature rises and strength leaves. The day after taking the drug, the person loses memory. Our heroine listened to all this and realized with horror that this lady was telling the truth. At this point, Riga screamed in bewilderment and asked if they had proof. Even if he had bought poison from this dealer, where was the proof it was in the glass? He argued that he'd bought the poison at the request, but he hadn't used it, so he wasn't guilty of anything. For a guy who tried to escape, he certainly had plenty of confidence. At that moment, Essie asked the merchant if he could identify a drink that had been laced with the substance. The man, surprised, said he could. The Duke asked what if the poison had been added in small quantities. The merchant replied that this was possible since she had dealt with it herself. Noticing the Duke's intense gaze, the boy understood what he wanted from him, so he crawled towards the broken glass. The boy soon took a small amount of wine on his finger and licked it. He soon became thoughtful. A few seconds later, he said it was definitely a love potion. Essie asked him again, perplexed. The ladies began whispering, saying they'd heard about it. They'd even considered buying it, but they hadn't realized it would turn out to be such a drug. Our heroine was surprised that such a convenient thing actually existed. If there were a cure that could force someone to fall in love, then she would. At that very moment, a brilliant idea came into our heroine's head, which even left her in a stupor. People around noticed that Lydia's behavior had changed, so they asked in confusion if everything was okay. Our heroine suddenly came to cleared her throat and said she was fine. At that moment, a loud female scream was heard behind her. Turning her head, Lydia was horrified to discover that the source of the scream was Agrita, and that there was a dagger at her neck. People asked Mr. Riga, perplexed, what he was doing. He nevertheless said he didn't think things would turn out this way. He turned to His Excellency and said that he wished for only one thing: for today's incident to in no way affect him or his family. It was funny that there were so many witnesses here, and this fool decided to take a man hostage. Lydia knew he was cornered now, but she wanted to know why he had chosen to grab Ari. Our heroine then looked at Darbury and asked him in bewilderment where he had been and why he had not protected Lady Agrita. The guy, of course, was primarily protecting Lydia. Our heroine understood all the circumstances, but still persisted. Meanwhile, Riga hurried the Duke, telling him to give his word quickly, and then he would release the lady. Lydia understood that if this continued, he would pretend to draw a knife. He might mistakenly draw a knife for real and kill Ari. Our heroine was curious about the danger that might threaten her, but she didn't want to find out about it this way. Essie suddenly asked if he should save the lady. Our heroine, perplexed, asked again. Essie asked his sister if he should save the hostage. The girl, perplexed, said yes. In the blink of an eye, the Duke lunged and slammed Riga's wrist with all his might. The boy immediately fell to the ground and began groaning in pain. Our heroine looked into her brother's eyes in bewilderment and was shocked by his speed, because she didn't even see anything. Anyway, at that moment, a pale Ari ran up to Lydia in horror and hugged her, asking if she had survived. At this time, Essie asked the guards to hand this man over to his family, and later he would personally deal with his crimes. Our heroine continued to hug Agrita, but she also understood that it would be noisy for a while. At that moment, Darbury approached her and asked her to first move to another place, since they also needed to clean up the shards from the broken glass. Our heroine agreed, but at that moment she remembered something thanks to Riga. Although it certainly wasn't a love potion, with its help, she could win Essie's heart. After some time, our heroine turned to Darbury in surprise and asked him if it was really worth going that far. Now briefly about what happened in the banquet hall some time ago. A whole crowd of noblewomen asked Lady Lydia in disbelief if she was okay. They uttered horrified remarks about how freakish Cami was, but fortunately, nothing happened. For a long time, people in the banquet hall came up to her and chatted incessantly. Sometimes it even seemed as if they were attending her autograph session. Thanks to Sir Darbury's ironclad barrier, any man regardless of age could not approach her. Despite the sweet "I want to say hello to the lady" look, he remained firm in his opinion. The knight even took small children away from the lady, which our heroine was incredibly surprised by. The guy nevertheless smiled, looking at the lady, and told her that he was only following orders. Soon night fell outside. Our heroine smoothly moved from the banquet hall to her room. Right now, she was sitting on the bed and reading a book about this place once again. She finally found what she was looking for: information about the three gods existing in this world: the god of time, the god of love, and the god of destruction. If what the temple of the god of time had prepared for the goddess were beads that could turn back time, then, in the temple that worships the god of love, they prepared a shawl of charm, and this is what was said about it in the book. According to tradition, other people shouldn't hate the goddess. She should be loved by everyone, and the gift they prepare will help her achieve this. It was a shawl of enchantment. If the goddess wore it, then everyone who saw her would begin to feel something more than mere affection for her. They will feel a sense of longing from members of the same sex and love from members of the opposite sex, and the affection between family and friends will become even deeper. Reading this, our heroine understood that all she had to do was steal the treasure of the temple that worshipped the god of love. Then Ari will be able to win Essie's heart without any problems. He asks why she only remembered this now. There was a good reason for this. First, Agrita didn't use the shawl of charm because everyone loved her without it. Even those who were envious and jealous of her, when they fell under the influence of her kind heart, eventually fell in love with her, even without the help of the shawl of charm. The shawl's effectiveness was great, but its owner didn't find it particularly useful. Even the shawl of charm couldn't escape the fate of being forgotten in the closet. The most important reason is that the main character of the book, Agrita's lover, is the crown prince who knew about the existence of the shawl. As a result, this genius allegedly accidentally burned it. He had no hesitation in getting rid of the temple's precious gift in a single day. In this, he and Essie were alike. That's why the shawl of enchantment was barely mentioned in the book. But in any case, our heroine decided to steal the shawl of enchantment and give it to Ari. However, it wasn't as simple as it seemed. She simply stole the beads after all. But could she do it all again? If you're a temple, their structure is likely similar. And the method by which the treasure was hidden is probably the same. Lydia began praying to God, asking him to make the theft successful this time. Stealing was wrong, but she did it to survive. Of course, it is very foolish to pray to God for the successful theft of the temple treasure, but so our heroine spent a heart-stirring night with shameless prayer. Our heroine told herself that she would steal the shawl of charm from the temple of love, and if with its help Ari could charm Essie then, Lydia will definitely take this opportunity to escape from her villainous brother, the perfect plan. If she had her way, she would steal the shawl right now and run away from here. But she cannot recklessly visit the temple where the god of love is worshipped. You must submit a preliminary request and obtain permission. If your donation doesn't exceed a certain amount, permission will not be granted. Lydia immediately became suspicious. Could those guys really be running some kind of business? It even smacked of arrogant hucksters. Anyway, the lady called the butler and handed him the letter, asking him to send it to the temple. The man looked at her in surprise and asked if she was really going there. The girl looked at him and said that she was. In that case, the man decided to ask her why she was going there. She hates churches, doesn't she? Lydia, perplexed, said that wasn't true. It was simply a period of raging fury consumed by resentment at the miserable fate of her past life. It's not that she outright hates temples, but rather that she's simply developed an interest in the temple that worships the god of love. Smiling sweetly, our heroine looked at the butler and told him that the god of love sounded very romantic. The man reminded her that she considered him a selfish narcissist. Our heroine asked him to forget about it, as it was in the past. At that point, she pointed out that it was already lunchtime, so she changed the subject. The action takes us to the dining room, where at that moment, Sir Darbury killed a snake that suddenly appeared. The guy looked at her in bewilderment and asked the lady how long ago their bad luck had started. He was surprised that strange incidents were happening several times a day. It was truly strange, because the snake suddenly appeared while they were eating lunch. As it was heading toward Ari, Darbury caught it and cut it in two. This morning, another tragedy occurred. A huge frame nearly fell on a girl's head, and it was of course Sir Darbury who saved her. She was told that this year would be exceptionally unlucky Ari, and Lydia were a little amused, but it wasn't surprising. Sir Darbury, however, was less than delighted. He scratched his head in surprise and told the girls they should be careful. At that moment, our heroine reminded him of how he'd just caught a snake. The girl asked if anyone else could have handled it quite well. The snake simply crawled up very quietly, so quietly that he and Ari only noticed it when Sir Darbury killed it. The knight told the lady that he managed to catch the snake because it was him. If it had been an ordinary knight, he would likely have drawn his sword when the snake bit its target. In that case, our heroine dared to suggest that Sir Darbury was unusual. The guy laughed and said, "How could it be otherwise? It sounds like a joke at first, but it's actually true. Darbury Sack is one of the most talented swordsmen in the Widgreen family. Rumor has it that if only he had a different background, he would have taken a leadership position in the Imperial Palace. But what's more important is that Essie is the one who simply took him for his talent, regardless of any other factors. There's no need to talk about his skills, because he proves them himself. Sir Darbury was able to catch the snake, but our heroine suddenly began to wonder who would be able to save Ari when he was no longer around. If saving Ari is such a difficult task, even if many people are assigned to her, their skills will not be enough, and she will still die. It's certainly rare to find someone on Sir Darbury's level. However, she suddenly thought about it and decided that Essie would take care of that anyway. Our heroine understood that as soon as he fell in love with Ari, he himself would take care of and provide protection for his beloved. At that very moment, a man ran into the room, screaming in utter terror. Everyone turned their gaze to him. Seeing the dead snake, He couldn't believe his eyes. The man rushed toward it and began screaming in terror, begging Flora not to leave him. Our heroine had absolutely no idea what was happening right now, so she looked at the man in surprise. Just then, the butler entered the room, addressing Lydia in a trembling voice. Our heroine asked what had happened. The man said that this man is a trader of rare animals and various goods. Some time ago, he was imagining something in the mansion, and suddenly his pet snake disappeared. He was confused, and then Lydia ultimately decided that the owner was responsible for not looking after her pet, as Ari had almost been in danger, and that compensation could even be claimed in this situation. However, this man too was merely an unfortunate victim of this world. The girl asked for compensation and to send him home. The butler told her she was very generous. Soon after it became a peaceful time, the dangers that regularly approached Ari were dealt with by Sir Darbury. The temple's response, which she had been waiting for, also arrived 2 days later. It was a little later than she had expected, but still, he arrived the day after the end of the 4-day celebration, so it was just in time for our heroine. As soon as she received the letter, she quickly got ready and got into the carriage, heading straight to the temple. Of course, before leaving, our heroine did not forget to explain their plan to Ari. Already in the carriage, Sir Darbury turned to the lady, asking her if she had heard the information that freak Riga had been kicked out of the family. Our heroine asked again, to which the knight reminded her of the incident at the banquet, saying that he was a depraved scum. Ri asked in surprise if this criminal had really been kicked out of the family. In that case, she wondered what would happen to him. Was he no longer an aristocrat? Darbury nodded his head, indicating that this guy was now no different from an ordinary commoner. Originally, the son of a count, he was a nobleman, but held no title. After breaking ties with his family, the commie name disappeared from his life entirely. However, to do this, they must be truly decisive and sever all ties. Simply telling the person to leave won't work in this case. To prove your plans, you must destroy your certificate of kinship. Your expulsion from your family must be documented and notarized by the palace. This makes it impossible for him to be accepted back into the family later, which is why this rarely happens in an aristocratic society where blood decides everything. Lydia then said that Count Kami had made a firm decision when he decided to exile his son. Darbury said that this was very wise, because if the count sheltered the criminal, they would all die together, and this was not a wise choice. Nevertheless, our heroine suddenly had an ominous premonition. Come to think of it, she'd heard Essie go out somewhere yesterday. She thought he must have had some business to attend to and didn't pay much attention to it. But what if he actually went to Count Kami and threatened him? Ri, however, at that moment turned to her sister and told her that this information was as refreshing as soda. Our heroine decided, however, that it shouldn't bother her too much, so she laughed and said that she felt as if she had drunk a soda. Even though what this jerk was about to do to her was just an attempt, it seems like he's done this more than once, so he deserved everything he did. That's what's refreshing. Anyway, after a while, Ari asked in surprise how much longer they had to go. Lydia assumed they did, because they had a long way to go. Ri began to yawn, saying she was feeling a little seasick. Lydia smiled and said she understood, and would wake her up as soon as they arrived. As a result, as soon as the girl touched her head to the back of the chair, she literally immediately fell asleep. At this moment, Darbury approached our heroine and asked her if she had ever been to the Temple of Love. Our heroine said she hadn't been there. Sir Darbury told her it was his first time, too. He remembered little about visiting the temples. Incidentally, he said that he once didn't believe in gods at all. These words brought back another story from Lydia's dark past. Anyway, she told him that he had thought this way for a long time. Could it be that he had now come to faith? Darbury paused and said that in a sense that was true. Lydia suggested that things had changed and gotten better. As despair overwhelms her and hope fades, doubts about the existence of gods emerge. Perhaps the meeting between Darbury and Essie was the key moment that changed his faith. Our heroine told him that she understood him, but at that very moment, the carriage hit a stone which caused them to shake violently, and even Ari woke up. The girl twisted her head around in confusion, asking what was going on. Lydia, for her part, was terrified, almost biting her tongue off. Sir Darbury looked at Milady in bewilderment and asked her if everything was all right. The girl came to and said she was fine. However, looking outside, our heroine was in incredible shock as they found themselves in a forest. Darbury immediately asked if they were going the right way. Lydia said she was also new here and could guess they were in the wrong place. The knight then decided that he would now find out from the coachman what was going on, but our heroine asked him to leave it to her. Looking out the window, our heroine realized the carriage was heading in the wrong direction, but would the coachman hear her? She began calling out to him. The man, however, did not respond to my lady's words, and only continued to mutter something under his breath, while driving the carriage forward. Lydia didn't understand what was happening to him, when suddenly the man said that, having lived his whole life as a beggar, he wouldn't die alone. They would die together, and he would take them with him to the grave. Our heroine, of course, did not hear the coachman's mad muttering, but she herself dared to assume that he had gone crazy because he was driving the carriage to an unknown destination. At that very moment, a question formed in her mind. What time is it now? Soon after this thought, the carriage began to rock violently. Then the girl looked out the window and noticed that the carriage was rapidly flying towards the cliff. After thinking for a long time, the girl took out the time bead and bit it, because everything had gone too far. A moment later, our heroine found herself in the dining room. Darbury and Henri looked at Lydia in surprise and asked if everything was all right. Lydia returned to the dining room a day later, but her gums were still sore. Ree turned to her sister again, asking if she was okay. Our heroine stood up silently and said that everything was fine, but she would go to her room. As soon as the girl entered her room, she slammed it shut, perplexed by the fact that she saw a cliff when the carriage tilted. She was riding on the very edge, and they almost died. They almost went to the other world. Lydia always lived by intuition. Looking at her trembling hands in horror, she realized that death could take them all in its arms. It was quite expected that something could happen to Henri. However, when Darbury was nearby, our heroine was calm. How could she have known that the coachman would go crazy and decide to kill himself and them too by driving off the cliff? Either way, the girl stood up thinking that everything that happens is for the best. Now she looked at the whole situation differently. If only it were possible to live peacefully in this world. Then Lydia put everything out of her head again and decided that there was no need to panic. The main thing was to be careful. Sometime later, our heroine spoke to Alex, telling him she was appointing him as coachman. Confused, he asked why him. Lydia decided that he was the youngest and healthiest of all the servants, and also the most efficient overall. He was the prime candidate who wouldn't cause any problems. Our heroine patted him on the shoulder and said that she chose him because she had a big soul, and she simply trusted him. Alex then laughed sweetly and told the lady that she certainly couldn't find anyone more reliable. He was always open and good-natured. Lydia smiled back and told him to have hope. This guy didn't seem to understand the word despondency. Having dealt with one problem one way or another, our heroine was still worried about something. To be on the safe side, she seated Darbury next to Alex and brought the knights to ride with them in the carriage. Ree asked our heroine in surprise if she was nervous, to which Lydia replied that she was a little nervous. She also pulled back the curtains to see everything going on outside and grabbed a watch to keep track of time. Now she definitely wouldn't miss a thing. As soon as all the preparations were made, our guys finally set off on their journey. However, before they could even get going, they suddenly stopped. Lydia asked what had happened. Darbury approached our heroine, telling the lady that a child was in the way of the carriage. Lydia didn't even have time to ask anything when suddenly a scream was heard from outside the carriage. The cause of this cry was indeed a boy who blocked the royal carriage and did not let it pass. Even Henri moved at the sound of these cries and looked out the window to see what was happening on the street. The child was about 10 years old. He was dirty and shabby. His appearance screamed that he really needed help, but Lydia said they needed to move on. Both Sir Darbury and Henri looked at their lady in surprise and wonder. The girl asked what was unclear and told Alex to go. She herself understood that under normal circumstances, she would have gone out to him without a second thought. But now everything was different. The reason for this was that it was already 12:30, which meant that now all we had to do was guess what would happen this time. Darbury was still trying to stop the lady, when suddenly from the child's direction came not only his own voices, but also the voices of adults praising him. A crowd of men approached him, telling him that the mouse had been right. The noble carriage had indeed appeared here, and all they had to do was wait. The guy, almost with tears in his eyes, began to say that he kept his word, and therefore asked them not to attack their village. Shortly after these words, the boy turned around and left the scene. One of the knights emerged from the carriage and asked in surprise who all these people were. Darbury dared to suggest that they were bandits. Another knight suggested they were in trouble. Darbury smiled and said it was more like an abnormal situation. Taking up their blades, they began to count the number of bandits, but nevertheless, more and more people were drawn to them. Not knowing what to do, the knight told the others that no matter what happened, they must be prepared to die here. At that moment, our heroine turned to Darbury and asked him if they could stop all these people. The guy asked her not to worry, because if they turned the crew around right now, they would quickly reach the guard's outpost, and he would hold off the bandits the whole time. Looking into Sir Darbury's eyes full of determination, our heroine understood that he was not lying, and would really stand to the end at the cost of his own life. Our heroine, however, was not going to risk her best knight, so when she took out the bead, she broke it again. A short time later, she woke up in her bed. Lydia now realized that given the current situation, going out with Henri was a bad idea. At first, she thought that bad things were happening because she was careless, so she thought that with planning, everything would be fine. But perhaps something else was more important. The annoying thing was that it took 2 beads to understand that it was not worth leaving the estate. Unlike ordinary robbers, there were many more of these guys. No matter how you look at it, they were in the minority. Finding themselves in such a difficult situation was more than just bad luck. If you think about it within the confines of the home, all problems are rather minor, like broken vases and picture frames. But when Henri was in the square, she encountered much more serious events: the collapse of the clock tower and an explosion. Our heroine didn't understand why everything was so hard, and soon began to grieve because she had lost 2 whole beads. But what was even sadder was not this, but the fact that if they went somewhere again, then another collapse would happen. She has no choice but to leave Henri at home and go to the temple herself. But who will protect her from the dangers in the estate? Even if Lydia manages to steal the shawl, Henri might die in her absence, and all will be in vain. Nevertheless, entrusting it to any servant is not advisable. Lydia knew Darbury would follow her anyway, but she still decided she should at least try to persuade him. After some time, she came to him to discuss it, but the guy said it was impossible. It was too obvious. Nevertheless, the girl continued to plead with him. Darbury suddenly asked her if he would be killed if he disobeyed orders, and did her such a favor. He also explained that no one had as many talents as he did, and no one possessed the same strength. Lydia said he was right, and that was exactly what she meant. With his outstanding abilities, he must protect Henri in the estate. Darbury still stood his ground, telling her that it was completely out of the question, because his duty was to protect Lady Lydia. He asked why he couldn't ask someone else to look after Miss Grace, if she was so worried. Lydia, however, knew she couldn't. So she asked him. It didn't seem like there was another knight in the estate who could match Darbury in strength, although there were several. Such gifted individuals were entrusted with work befitting their level. She couldn't ask them to look after Henri. However, the girl suddenly thought about it, because if it were Essie's order, they would undoubtedly think about it. At that very moment, the last option came into her head, which was the last hope. She ignored Darbury's question, so she simply turned around and ran in an unknown direction. The simplest and most obvious way to solve this problem is to turn to Essie. However, recently, she's found it difficult to ask him for anything. The problem wasn't him. Essie always offered to help her without her even having to say it. She felt increasingly awkward every time her brother helped her and catered to her whims. That was the problem, and she realized it only recently. Eventually, all his worries would evaporate when he learned the truth. Soon the girl came to Essie's office, where the knight stood. He asked what she wanted. Our heroine told him she needed to talk to Essie alone. The guy nodded and said he understood. He asked for a moment's notice. Soon after, he knocked on his lordship's door, announcing that Miss Lydia had come to see him. At that very moment, the guy left the room and asked his sister to come in. Essie immediately asked what she wanted. Lydia sheepishly asked if she could ask him for something if he was free. The guy said that even if he was busy, it didn't matter, because he would listen to her, or maybe she would like to have some tea first. Our heroine refused, but thought about it. What better way to say it? She couldn't just say outright that she wanted to steal the shawl, but she was leaving Ari at home because her life was in danger. However, the girl said that she needed to go to the Temple of Love for a short while because she was hoping for her brother's help in finding an outstanding knight who would take care of Ari during her absence. The guy asked how outstanding this knight should be, to which our heroine answered him that he should be like Sir Darbury. Was it really necessary to explain the requirements for the candidate in more detail? Or would such a gifted person simply not agree to carry out such an assignment? Essie suddenly said that if someone like Darbury was needed, he'd do it. Our heroine, perplexed, asked again. The guy answered her that Sir Darbury would remain at the estate and he would go with her. Our heroine nevertheless looked at Essie's desk in surprise and asked if he was busy. The guy took a sip of tea and soon reminded her that none of this mattered. In this case, our heroine realized that now she would have to go on a third trip with Essie. After some time, the carriage was about to set off, and Sir Darbury joyfully saw my lady off. The girl, perplexed, told him that he'd turned her down first, and now he seemed so polite. He'd said he wouldn't change his mind. The boy said that the heavens were above them all, and they had no right to discuss their decisions. As punishment, he could say her name as many times as he wanted. With a heavy sigh, the girl headed to the carriage and soon asked her brother to climb inside. After they were ready to leave, our heroine asked Sir Darbury to take care of Ari. The guy happily said that she could rely on him, so they were looking forward to meeting soon. After a while, they were on their way. Our heroine looked at her brother and realized they should return as soon as possible, as he had a lot of things to do. Incidentally, it was strange that the coachman was now driving the carriage as smoothly as possible. The carriage was moving too calmly. However, this was not surprising because Essie was sitting inside, tall and powerfully built. Looking at his perfect, flawless features, she realized that it was difficult for people to remain calm around him, even if they didn't know who he was. Lydia suddenly wondered what if they hadn't known each other, and for example, their first meeting had taken place on the day of the ceremony. Of course, it's possible she could have been scared, but if madness had remained a secret for her, then communication might have been much more pleasant. But she still knew the truth thanks to the book, so she tried to keep him at a distance. At that moment, Essie opened his eyes, and noticing his sister's intense gaze, assumed that she wanted to ask something. Lydia was surprised he wasn't asleep, but in that case, she decided to ask him if he'd been to the Temple of Love before he said he'd never been there. This meant it was his first trip. After all, the Western Temple of Love is quite a famous place, so it would be quite interesting to see it. Essie told her he wasn't particularly drawn there, but was more interested in what exactly drew her there. She looked away and said she just wanted to see the views. The boy nodded his head and said he understood her. Soon after, he closed his eyes again. Our heroine noticed that he looked extremely tired. She could tell by the way he closed his eyes again. What surprised her was that despite his tiredness, he still went with her. In any case, she decided not to look for any deeper meaning in this, as the trip was going very comfortably. Incidentally, they were soon approaching their destination. As soon as she stopped abruptly, our heroine jumped up abruptly because she had been sleeping earlier. Lydia didn't even notice how she fell asleep, and of course she was wondering how long she slept. Just as she was about to leave, Essie got ahead of her to offer his hand to his sister. Soon our heroine raised her head and noticed the facade of the Temple of Love in front of her. The girl was surprised that getting here was quick and easy. She was also curious about Ari's situation. Her thoughts were soon interrupted by the words of a minister of the Western Temple of Love who came out to greet the guests. Our heroine introduced herself and then introduced her brother, Essie Widgreen. The girl said she'd heard a lot about them and was happy to see them. Then she glanced at Essie and enthusiastically declared that the rumors were true. He really is very handsome. However, she then decided to say that they were both beautiful, like something wonderful. Lydia, of course, was glad to hear these words, but she wondered why the temple servant was looking only at Essie. In any case, this was the least of her interests, because the shawl theft operation had begun right now. The girl soon said that, to put it briefly, their temple was built about 300 years ago. Our heroine was worried, because the temple's exterior looked a little different, but its interior was exactly the same as the Temple of Time. In that case, she knew the location of the room she needed would be the same. A secret place hidden in the room where the highest spiritual leaders remained. This is where the Shawl of Enchantment is located. Lydia clearly read the passage in the book that told her how to get the shawl. It should be easy enough to obtain if the storage method is the same as the beads. All she needs to do is infiltrate the chamber of the high servants. The temple was built thanks to the believers, so she didn't think there would be any guards near the room she needed. Moreover, she was sure of it. But the main thing was not to make noise. Lydia would be as invisible as a ghost, so no one would notice her. Meanwhile, the minister showed the prayer room, where one could leave a donation and pray to God. The girl told the guests that as soon as they finished the prayer, she would show them in turn the small auditorium, the large reception room, and the large prayer room. The attendant would have liked to take them to the large prayer room first, but the high priest was currently praying there. Lydia asked in surprise. The girl said that everything was correct, and if they wanted to watch him, she would warn the high priest about it. Our heroine smiled, and with a cat-like look, said that it wasn't worth doing. She understood that this was her chance. If the high priest runs away, now it only means that the room she needs is now empty. However, Lydia decided to ask the minister what she would do while they were in the prayer room. The girl said she had no right to disturb their prayer, so she would wait for them in the hallway. Lydia even more joyfully said she understood. Soon after they found themselves alone in the room, our heroine immediately began to think about how to quickly escape. Get from here to the high servants' room, quickly pick up the shawl and return back. Lydia begged thieves all over the world to grant her their powers. However, she knew that if she went out into the hallway, nothing would come of it. So the place where they can't detect her is a window, of course. Exiting through it is the best option. Our heroine immediately fixed her gaze on her brother, and they met. Lydia told him she needed to go somewhere for a while, but she'd be quick. Lydia asked if he could wait for her, but the guy said that was out of the question and that he would go with her. Thus, they set out on their journey. Incidentally, it wasn't all that difficult to find the chamber of the high servants, because the interior was the same as the Temple of Time, which our heroine had recently successfully robbed. Whoever built them, they all look as if the creator didn't bother and simply copied the structures. And so, at last they arrived. The Temple of Love, the chamber of the high priests. Lydia told her brother that they were finally there. As she approached the shelf, she realized that she needed to press on this shelf to open the secret space. She couldn't do it the first time, so her brother came up to her and pressed the shelf. Soon after, the door opened, and they found themselves in a secret room. Wonderful! Looking at the chest inside, our heroine dared to assume that the shawl was kept in it. The moment was similar to when she stole the time beads. Either way, she slowly walked toward the chest. At that moment, our heroine heard Essie laugh and asked what was wrong. The guy told her it was just funny. Our heroine never fully understood whether it was about her or about the situation itself, but that didn't matter now because there were much more important things. At first glance, this chest might seem ordinary, but in fact it was imbued with divine power. The girl knew it couldn't be opened without a reason. There was a magic that would only allow the door to open if the letters that made up the password were chosen correctly. It was something akin to unlocking a smartphone. However, the girl tried to use the same code as in the Temple of Time. Lydia pressed the buttons, thinking that the god worshipped in this temple was Asimor, the god of love. When the symbols disappeared, the chest would open. However, instead of the desired success, an error popped up, causing the program to start beeping incredibly loudly. Our heroine didn't understand what was happening, or why the password was incorrect. In any case, she knew they could be caught at this rate. Using the name of the deity worshipped in the temple, wasn't it written in the book that this was an absolute rule? Soon after, the loud noises and panic silence followed. Fortunately, it all stopped. However, our heroine had no idea what the code could be other than the god's name. Could it be another password? Cupid, Eros, Cupid. Lydia typed in every god of love she knew, but none of them worked. How could that be? Our heroine knew that if the alarm went off again, they could be caught. Meanwhile, Essie was looking around. At that moment, a confused voice was heard, explaining that the sound was coming from inside. The girl instantly grabbed her brother, realizing they needed to hide. In the end, in their haste, they had to hide behind the podium, and yet she was glad that she had blocked the entrance with a bookshelf. Meanwhile, the guards realized the sound was coming from here, but they also realized there was no one there. Could it have been their imagination? Another knight said that if he had heard correctly, the intruders might have already escaped, so they should go and look around the area. Soon, one of the knights left the room. and only one remained inside, saying that he would catch up with him. Hearing the sound of the door closing, our heroine thought that they had left. However, a moment later, a click was heard, and soon a voice was already inside their room, asking if anyone was there. Lydia held her breath. The knight looked around and still thought that this couldn't be, because only a few people knew about this place. Soon after the door closed again, it seemed they were definitely gone this time. Thank heavens! Our heroine tried to get up, saying that something irreparable could have happened, when suddenly she fell on her brother. Essie grabbed Lydia and looked into her eyes and asked if she was okay. Our heroine was still so close that her heart was pounding. Could it be that she hadn't yet recovered from the recent upheavals? Having put her thoughts aside one way or another, the girl jumped up from her seat and headed towards the chest. At that moment, the idea came to her mind to write, not the god of love, but the god of beauty liar. After that, the chest actually opened. Could this password really be correct? After all, this is a temple dedicated to the god of love. She suggested they should be punished for blasphemy. The nun, incidentally, couldn't take her eyes off Essie's face, which led her to believe that beauty is a gift from God. That's why the girl decided to try this option. It's amazing that beauty comes first and foremost from love. One way or another, our heroine understood this back when she was talking about monetary offerings. Shortly after Lydia opened the chest, Essie rose from the ground and asked her if she had accomplished what she wanted. Holding the shawl of charm in her hands, our heroine told him that their business here was finished, so it was time to go. After a while, they returned to the prayer room. Fortunately, without incident, our heroine suddenly asked Essie for his jacket. The guy decided not to argue with her too much, so he gave his sister a jacket, and she put it on, thereby hiding the shawl. Essie suddenly looked at his sister and said that if this was all she wanted, she should have told him back at the estate, and he would have stolen it. Lydia naturally wondered, how? She couldn't imagine Essie committing the theft the same way she had. In his case, after stealing the temple's high priest, he would most likely have received the shawl through threats and killed the priest so that he wouldn't tell. The thought of it sent shivers down our heroine's spine. While she doesn't steal, she doesn't wish such harm on anyone. The girl smiled sweetly and said it wasn't worth it, since stealing it herself was worth it. She immediately decided that sounded stupid. In any case, they decided they had to go. As soon as they left, the attendant asked if everything was okay. Noticing Lydia, she suggested that the room was chilly. Our heroine, however, said that she was in fact cold even before coming here. The girl, horrified, remarked on how quickly the seasons were changing. She then asked if she could offer them tea in the reception hall. Our heroine began to show off her acting chops again, saying there was no need to worry about them so much. They'd finished praying, so they'd go back. Lydia said she was yearning to enjoy the temple's views longer, but the air was starting to get cold. The attendant felt sorry she couldn't help. However, our heroine saw with the naked eye that the only thing she regretted was letting Essie go. One way or another, the servant of the Temple of Love asked to be allowed to accompany them to the exit. As she walked, our heroine thought that after stealing the shawl of charm, she would not have the courage to visit the temple again. At that very moment, she screamed in horror, thinking that she had forgotten about the offerings she was supposed to leave in their prayer room. In fact, the temple's treasure was stolen, so it must be surprising that in such a situation, she would be concerned that she did not leave an offering. Nevertheless, that was the point. If she left the offerings, she would have made amends to her conscience a little. In that case, she asked the attendant to wait a little. Lydia approached her brother and said that she needed to go back to the prayer room for a minute, so he should wait for her here. A short time later, Lydia stopped on her way to the prayer room to leave an offering. Could there be a more conscientious thief than her? At that moment, a stranger was walking towards our heroine and accidentally touched her. Our heroine immediately noticed that the shawl of charm had fallen to the floor. An unknown voice apologized, saying she'd dropped something. He lifted the shawl to hand it to the stranger, and Lydia suddenly noticed the gold embroidery on the white fabric. It was obvious at first glance that the clothes were expensive. At that moment, he wrapped her in a shawl. It was a rather familiar feeling for her. However, at that moment, the guy smiled and told the girl that the shawl suited her very well. Seeing this guy's face, our heroine realized in horror that the crown prince was standing right in front of her. Dazzling blonde hair reminiscent of the sun's radiance. Green eyes that seemed to have absorbed all the green in the world. The male protagonist is both the universe's protagonist and Ygritte's lover. He is the crown prince of Ygritte, who will later ascend to the throne. Our heroine didn't understand what she was doing here, but she still decided to introduce herself, saying that she was Widgreen, the junior mistress of these lands. The guy suddenly told her that he had seen her before. Lydia smiled and said she was honored that he remembered her. In the original, the crown prince was a man who loved to hang out everywhere. If he hadn't been so prone to walking, they would have crossed paths much more often. One way or another, the girl decided that it was time for her to get back to business, so she thanked him and wished that God would bless them to meet again. However, as soon as our heroine turned around, the crown prince turned to her and asked her to stop. Our heroine didn't understand why he was staring at her. Then suddenly, he told her that her curls looked like roses in bloom. Our heroine couldn't understand why he was acting like this. Maybe he ate something bad? She knows that Ygritte treated everyone without exception with simplicity, unlike her who behaved formally. She is not the kind of person who should receive compliments from the prince. Once again, she wondered why the prince was addressing her in this way, when suddenly our heroine noticed the shawl of charm and realized that it was her doing. Thus, the crown prince became the first guinea pig, but thanks to this, she noticed this immediate effect. Nevertheless, it was not for nothing that it was the temple's crown jewel. In any case, she thanked the prince and complimented him on his hair, which looked like rays of a scorching sun. The guy asked in surprise if she really liked them. Lydia asked him again, surprised. Ygritte responded by asking if she liked his hair color. For example, he liked it. Our heroine decided that this sounded rather narcissistic, but perhaps he had intended it differently. The young ladies have nicknamed the crown prince the Iron Wall. But could she get into trouble? She's even hidden a shawl of charm. It is amazing that this arrogant temple created something truly frightening in its power. Lydia took his words as compliments, but she did not deserve such an honor, so she again asked for forgiveness, but she had to go. After that, she started to leave, but noticed the prince's gaze following her. Lydia hoped he wouldn't follow her. Halfway there, she stopped again, because once again, she caught herself thinking that she had forgotten to leave offerings. After a while, she returned to her brother and decided to forget about it. Essie asked if she was finished, to which she nodded. The action takes us to His Highness, who has finally been found by the High Servant. The man looked at the prince in surprise and asked if he was lost again. He reminded him that he had said that the waiting room was in a different place. He was very surprised to see him on his way. The prince apologized, saying it was an inconvenience to him as well. The man was nonetheless pleased that His Highness was aware of his own shortcomings. A master of all the subtleties of literature and gifted with many other talents, the Crown Prince of Ygritte Hayden. In reality, he had terrible spatial orientation, and the problem was quite serious. But why did so few people around him know about it? No matter how wrong the direction of his movement was, no one suspected it, since it seemed to everyone that he was going that way out of his own desire. The high servant was one of the few who knew the truth. The prince suddenly told the servant, "Truly a temple of love." The man, perplexed, asked what he was talking about. A face with feline features that betrayed her conflicting inner feelings. Her hair was also scarlet, matching the blooming roses in the garden. Had he ever felt this way when meeting her? Thinking about Milady Lydia Widgreen, he realized that they had only crossed paths a couple of times at balls. However, he certainly did not remember that at that moment her appearance had filled him with such admiration as it did now. Either way, he decided it was wonderful to meet beautiful people. He hadn't experienced anything like that in a long time. Some time ago, one of the servants addressed the prince, telling him that he would soon find love. Hayden asked again in surprise, to which the girl told him that he would meet his destiny within this year. One of the ministers approached his friend and asked her since when she became a fortune-teller. At that moment, he did not attach any importance to this prediction, because in the Temple of Love, such words are always said, but in fact, he would like the prophecy to come true. The action, meanwhile, moves to a dark night, to a building under whose roof a character familiar to us was sleeping. This man was Riga, who was tormented by nightmares and woke up in a cold sweat almost every night. The boy muttered madly and cursed Essie Widgreen. His family had abandoned him, and that bastard would kill him. He had nothing left. All his money, his position, his entourage, and even part of his body had been simply taken away. At the ceremony, it was discovered that he had drugged Lady Widgreen's drink. He tried to escape unscathed by taking a hostage, but to no avail. The guy thought he was unlucky, but could he have imagined that everything would turn out this way? After all those proceedings, he lost his position. As soon as he was stripped of his noble birth, he was completely removed from the family tree. Even watching as the documents of kinship were torn up in front of his face, the guy did not take the whole situation seriously. On paper, even though he was cut off from the family, he was still a blood son. Parents couldn't just drive away their own son, right? The only thing that was offensive was that he wouldn't be able to inherit anything, but that didn't mean that he would be kicked out of the mansion immediately. He thought he wouldn't have any problems as long as he lived quietly and peacefully, but he was thrown out of the house empty-handed. He tried to contact them, but was unable to. Also, if you go straight to the main gate of the house, you will be driven away, just like any other commoner. While wondering what Widgreen was afraid of, something amazing happened, because Duke Widgreen appeared in the alley right in front of him. They looked at him and said that if he did not answer their questions, they would cut off each one in turn. As soon as he laughed, Widgreen tackled him to the ground, telling Darbury to cut off the next part. The guy was shaking in horror and telling them that they shouldn't do this because he would tell everything. The blow followed again. Darbury looked at the Duke in bewilderment, asking why he had brought him here if he could do everything himself. The guy said that it was noisy here, so if he wanted to do something, he needed to be taken, or a doctor needed to be called and helped. Darbury looked at Riga and told him that if he lived long, his life would be like hell. He said in any case that it was for his own good. Just at that moment, the Duke stepped forward. As soon as the Duke left, Darbury sat down next to Riga, and taking out his dagger, he also revealed his mad smile. The boy swung his blade and sliced open his ankle. Grabbing Riga's face, he asked him if that wasn't better than cutting off his fingers. Hearing no answer, the boy told him that if he didn't do anything, he wouldn't be happy. Even thinking about the dirty things he tried to do to his little girl makes me want to kill him right now. It would be easy to let him live, but he'll have to put up with it. Once again, Riga returned to reality after his horrific nightmare. The boy clutched his face in terror, realizing he was going to be killed. He cursed these freaks who made him like this, the woman who was to blame. Meanwhile, our heroine's donations, which remained in the prayer hall, were eventually delivered through the priest. At first, the priest looked at it in bewilderment, but Lydia handed it over like a bag of money. It was all her conscience. Yes, our heroine may be a thief, but she still had a conscience, even though she went too far. After some time, our heroes returned back to the palace, and Darbury was just waiting for them. The guy helped them out and immediately asked how they enjoyed the trip to the temple. Half asleep, our heroine told him she would be impressed. Lydia expected to die after only half a day's carriage ride. Essie, by the way, was perfectly fine. After such a long trip, the first thing our heroine did was take a bath and collapse onto her soft bed. Our heroine suddenly remembered meeting the prince in the temple. If she remembered correctly, it seemed that was also in the book. The beginning of autumn is when the weather changes. Lately, the heir to the throne had been feeling a certain emptiness. He visits the Temple of Love to see if he can find the reason for his feelings. She thought it was just autumn, but he said he would meet his destiny within a year. He hears a prophecy that isn't a prophecy at all. Later, in a deserted alley, as if by fate, he meets Agrita and remembers the prophecy. Be that as it may, that was why he was in the temple. But why was he in this distant temple of love at such a time? With a heavy sigh, our heroine decided that she was simply unlucky to meet him there. At least in that place at that time, if she meets him, when she has the shawl of charm with her, a young girl who barely knows his face, will he utter that phrase again? If the prince is sane, how will he remember it? Isn't he left with a history of suffering in the blanket? She suddenly wondered why he didn't just give her the shawl back and wrap it around her neck. She immediately wondered if it wasn't just kindness that he'd picked up what had fallen to the floor and wrapped it around her neck. Perhaps bad luck was still good luck. Nevertheless, she felt very sorry for the prince because he had a good memory. Could she receive the blessing of oblivion as soon as possible? Just then, Ari ran into the room, asking her sister how her trip to the temple had gone. Was everything okay? Our heroine, nevertheless, turned away from Ari suspiciously and began to laugh slyly. Soon after, she turned around and proudly showed off the shawl of charm that she had taken from the Temple of Love. Ah, Ri asked in surprise if she could touch her. Lydia told her she could but only touched her. Our heroine stared at Ari's face, which radiated incredible admiration. The girl suddenly asked if they had stolen her right. Was it difficult, or had they managed without any problems? Our heroine was horrified to realize that they were almost caught as criminals, and she almost didn't guess the password. Anyway, she proudly said that it didn't matter how she stole it, because they had it. Ari told her sister that she was smart. The girl then picked up the shawl and asked if anyone who saw it truly fell in love with it. After all, it looked like just ordinary fabric. Now, the charm, not to mention the color and pattern, even if there is nothing tangibly special about the material, if it were not for the prince's sacrifice, she would not have known whether the shawl worked. Our heroine looked at Ari anyway, and suggested that she see for herself. Lydia didn't even wait for a moment to get an answer from Ari, and silently wrapped her shawl around herself. The girl's expression changed to shock and bewilderment. Within a moment, she began to see her sister differently. Our heroine looked at the girl anyway, and asked her how she felt about it. Ari laughed sheepishly, saying that she almost proposed to her sister. It was dazzling, and if she were a man, he would definitely have proposed. Or if same-sex marriage were legal, women would have proposed too. Still, it was interesting how it worked. Lydia told her that if she didn't tell her, they might not even know because it was magic. Ari also decided to put on a shawl of charm and show the effect to Lydia. Our heroine was instantly captivated by Ari's beauty, so the idea of a proposal immediately popped into her head. Lydia soon said that, even though she'd been joking about the proposal, it was still interesting. She didn't even know how to put it properly. It felt like Ari had a halo when she first put on her shawl. Her heart was pounding, and she wanted to get closer and pretend to know him. Somehow she overcame the urge to win someone's affections. It was like being a nerd in a teen drama. Our heroine suddenly thought that if she wore such a thing, she would rather be called a witch than a goddess. The crown prince burned the shawl of charm because it was probably for Agrada's safety. With the great name of the Temple of Love, which she knows because she was a snob, the existence of this absurd treasure is something she is grateful for. Now Ari will use this shawl to attract Essie's attention, allowing her to escape as planned. Just at that moment, Ari got up from the bed and asked if she would really use the shawl of charm to seduce the villain from now on. Our heroine laughed sheepishly and told her that was true. Ari, however, said she was worried, but Lydia reminded her of the shawl's effect, so everything would be fine. Ari, in turn, reminded her that she would be dealing with a villain, to do so with her beautiful, perfect, and kind sister. Lydia couldn't understand where this perfection was coming from again. Was it because she was good at stealing? Lydia asked if she was afraid of Essie. The girl, perplexed, said that was true, because it was quite exciting. He was a villain after all. Our heroine knew better than anyone that Essie was a villain. But sometimes when he smiles at her, it's hard to take your eyes off him. Come to think of it, Ari hadn't paid attention to Essie from the very beginning. She thought it was because he was the male lead. At that moment, the girl told our heroine that she was right, because Essie really was very handsome. It was the first time she'd seen someone who looked like that. Ari suddenly looked at our heroine and asked her what she would do since her eyes and hair were not black. Our heroine said that she is apparently Korean to the core, so if the color of her hair and eyes is colorful, she does not feel like a human being. Ari suggested it was like looking at a beautiful painting or statue. Lydia said that was generally true. Even in her past life, she liked actors with multicolored hair. In any case, the girl glanced at the shawl and asked in surprise where and when she could use it. She decided it would be wrong to wear it always and everywhere. Lydia said she was right because it was garbage. If word got out while she was writing, she'd be taken to the capital. So if that's the case, that means Ari will have to use it when she's alone with Essie. The girl, perplexed, said she'd need help. She then asked Lydia what she was doing tomorrow. Our heroine answered her that tomorrow she would save her guards, which they would need. The action shifts to the next morning. The idea that Ari needed personal security had occurred to our heroine long ago. Sir Darbury is certainly a near-perfect knight, so while he is her guard, there are many limitations to protecting Ari. For example, the hostage situation in the banquet hall. Darbury abandoned Ari to protect her by any means necessary. As a result, the defenseless Ari was taken hostage and thus put into danger. If it weren't for Essie, she would have died once. Perhaps our heroine would have used the beads again. This could happen in the future, but Darbury is doing his duty, so he can't be blamed. By the way, Also, because Sir Darbury is always around, Ari had to be with her to receive help from him. Unfortunately, trouble comes even early in the morning, and Ari had no choice but to get up early and come to Lydia. It wasn't for 1 to 2 days, but because she got up early, it seems the girl complained of fatigue. Lydia assumed that she slept a lot in the morning, so if she had personal security, she would be able to sleep longer, to see a problem but not to solve it. It was impossible to find a man as talented, similar, or better than Sir Darbury. He thought it would be enough to entrust Ari's protection to the future, but that wasn't a fundamental decision. Even after she was gone, Ari would need good protection. But is there a solution now that wasn't there before? Of course there is, and that solution is the Shawl of Charm. After a while, the girl interrupted our heroine's thoughts and asked her sister if she could really save the guards. Holding an unknown document in her hands, Lydia asked to trust her and not ask unnecessary questions. The palace hosts at least 2 fencing competitions a year, as well as a flower festival in the spring, harvest festival in the fall, and other national holidays. Of course, the holidays wouldn't be complete without tournament events. This means that many promising fencers emerge throughout the year. Lydia was just thinking about hiring one of them as Ari's personal guard. This morning, she sent people to the guild to buy information, winners of all official fencing tournaments over the past 5 years. This document contained the personal information and location of those not yet serving anyone. Their victories in the tournament prove their exceptional skills, and of course, families who need talent will try to hire them. Either way, the fact that they haven't joined anyone yet shows how high their standards are. Among the 4 best knights, by the way, there was also one female swordswoman. At this point, while our heroine was studying the information, Darbury turned to her and said that it would not be easy. Our heroine certainly didn't want to hear these words, so she asked him in bewilderment what he was talking about. The guy said that he was simply describing the situation because such people usually want money or status. However, Sir Darbury says so because he hasn't yet heard of the Shawl of Enchantment. Only Lydia knows about it, and she had a way. Our heroine proudly told the knight that everything was fine and that she would show him an unusual situation. A noble and proud knight, of course, simply cannot break a contract that he himself signed. That's why our heroine is going to use the Shawl of Charm and simply force the knight to sign a contract with Ari. The Shawl of Enchantment was already like an addiction, although it was even somehow villainous. Among nobles, a personal knight is a servant. She'd heard that there were many who resorted to rudeness and vile behavior. Looking at Ari, she realized that compared to these nobles, Ari was simply an angel, kind and sweet. No guard could resist her. Incidentally, among the winners on the list, Linda Athel was the only female knight. When choosing the best candidate, Lydia thought about finding a guard who would always be close to Ari, so it would be best for her to be with a woman if possible. That's why our heroine decided to head straight to Ms. Linda Athel. She's going to melt her heart with a shawl of charm. After some time, our heroes finally met her, but the girl immediately disappointed them. Showing her hand, she said her left hand was injured. She hoped they knew about it before they came and hired her. Lydia and the others fell silent, perplexed. The girl told them the wound was serious, so she needed time to regain her sword skills. Soon she headed back to the house, saying that if they needed her, then they could come back next year. Darbury sighed and told the lady that everything was fine. After all, the first pancake was always lumpy. He assumed she wanted to speak out before being rejected again. Lydia looked at him with despair and begged him to shut up. Ari in turn wished her sister luck. With a heavy sigh, our heroine said there was nothing she could do about it. Next on the list was Sir Brandvillain. There were 3 more candidates, so all was well. Incidentally, Brandvillain won 2 tournaments in a row and has proven himself a talented swordsman. It would be great if he became Ari's bodyguard. After some time, they came to him. Understanding why they had come to him, he offered the sum of 100,000 gold. That's how much they would have to pay him per year. Lydia decided she should refuse. It was too much. Even if you were 3 times rich, that kind of sum would be hard to pay off. The most amazing thing was that Brandvillain didn't even bat an eye when he mentioned this number. Lydia smiled sweetly at him and said she understood. She then asked him if they would like to sit down and talk. In a deserted place, even if you wanted to, you couldn't refuse a shawl of charm. So what price would he agree to? Brand, however, said he wouldn't settle for less. Our heroine asked again, and the guy said that his younger brother had an incurable disease, and the entire amount was needed for his treatment. Otherwise, he would die. Lydia tried her best to hold on, unable to understand where he'd come up with such a dramatic story. She still wished him and his brother all the best. After a while, they were heading in the other direction. Darbury spoke in surprise that not even half of it remained, but he was here to meet a better man. At that moment, our heroine raised her head and was surprised at how quickly the sunny weather changed to such a gloomy one. One way or another, she reassured you, saying it was just the clouds. This weather phenomenon definitely had nothing to do with today. Of course, our heroine thought so, but it turned out that she was wrong to think so, because it seemed to be a sign. The remaining two were no different. The first was planning to move to meet his family. The second's fiancé died, so he went back to his hometown and disappeared. The girl didn't understand where so many tragic stories came from. But one way or another, the main question was, what should they do now? She understood that she could use the shawl charm regardless of their problems, because the shawl would definitely make them sign the contract. However, the problem in this case was that our heroine simply couldn't cast off her humanity. It was too difficult a choice. Ree and Darbury held hands in horror, because they did not know what mood Lady Lydia was in now. One way or another, they decided to defuse the situation, and therefore they suggested going out to eat. Lydia finally decided to agree, as she was getting hungry after all this time. Sir Darbury then suggested they enjoy a delicious lunch. Before this, our heroine, of course, turned around to find out what time it was. And it was already noon. After a while, they went into one of the eateries. The waitress offered them a seat by the window, but Lydia said they'd choose another spot. Soon they approached one of the tables in the center of the room and decided to sit there. Lydia decided to go into the restaurant not only for food, but also because Ari was unsafe outside. It would be much safer inside than outside. Someone could break in through the window, so Lydia decided to sit away from them. Just as they were about to order something at that moment, indeed, someone burst through the window and landed on the ground. Lydia looked at him, wondering if he was really hiding his face with a black mask in broad daylight. Wasn't that too suspicious? Just at that moment, the guy finally came to his senses, and soon he was staring straight into the eyes of our heroine. A moment later, he started running towards them, which seriously scared the girls. Lydia knew in her heart that this was what would happen. Darbury, of course, immediately grabbed his sword, but at that moment, something unexpected happened. This guy just tripped while running towards them and fell right in front of the table. Lydia looked at Darbury in confusion and asked if he really mastered the art of invisible light. The boy, confused as to what was going on, assumed that was exactly it. However, at that moment, another knight followed this guy into the restaurant through the window. The stranger stood up, looked at his target, and asked if he really hoped to escape. Lydia had no idea who he was. Anyway, the knight approached the guy, telling him that he was still very green. The girl looked at him in bewilderment and asked how he could dare rob someone in broad daylight. He couldn't even find an empty house. A strong kick followed soon after, but Sir Darbury did not allow the girls to watch. The sound that followed was like a groan. Had something broken on that guy? Most likely. Nevertheless, our heroine asked Darbury if he knew any of them. Meanwhile, the knight continued to kick the poor guy, and our heroine asked who he knew. The guy on the floor or the girl beating him up? Sir Darbury said the last option. It's Dylan. She's quite famous. Our heroine, noticing her sword, assumed she was a famous swordswoman. Lydia decided to ask just how famous this girl was anyway. The guy said she was a 5-time winner of Hidden. As far as our heroine knew, it was a bet, or rather a swordsman's tournament. Hidden is a small village on the outskirts of the Iranian islands. It's impossible to find by chance. You just need to know the way there. However, about 10 years ago, the word began to denote something more than just a village. Secret swordsmanship tournaments, held in the village arena, where bets began to be accepted. As a result, any spectator could either win or lose by betting on the tournament winner. Incidentally, human-related gambling was illegal. Rumor had it that a famous aristocrat oversaw these tournaments. Lydia even heard that, for the sake of spectacle, they don't take just anyone, but select professional fighters, regardless of their origin. Realizing that Dylan had once again won in no-holds-barred fights, where even murder was allowed, the girl decided that she was exactly what they needed. Lydia suddenly asked if she understood correctly that this girl hadn't yet signed a contract with any clan. Darbury replied that she was still apparently making money at Hiddens. Our heroine, hearing these words, instantly changed her face to a sly smile. Realizing what was about to happen, Sir Darbury tried to stop her, but to no avail. Our heroine ran up to Dylan, saying she was glad to meet her. She introduced herself first. Looking at the swordswoman, the girl asked to distract her for a minute and pay attention. Then she glanced at the ground and spotted a rock, which she used to hit the guy. Her precision and strength were astonishing, which is why Lydia liked her. However, all hopes were shattered in the blink of an eye. Dylan screamed and said she was against it. Lydia asked again in bewilderment, and the girl apologized and said that she did not deal with aristocrats. Now our heroine understood. The members of Hidden don't have the best opinion of aristocrats. In their eyes, they're pigs staging bloody spectacles for entertainment. Of course, Dylan thought that, to her, she was just another rich guy who didn't consider her a human being, which in a sense was natural. Lydia hadn't even considered the possibility that the girl could treat the aristocrat so poorly. But what to do now? She definitely couldn't let go. Dylan was the perfect fit. Outstanding skills, and she's also a woman attractive and daring. There were too many people here to use the shawl of enchantment. They needed to go somewhere else where they could be alone. But what if she wasn't in the mood for conversation? Just at that moment, the girl heard the waitress apologizing to the gentleman, saying that she had already called security and that they would arrive soon. Our heroine immediately approached Dylan and told her that security was on its way. She also asked what had happened. She thinks she caught this guy because he's a thief, right? Dylan, keeping her foot on the criminal, asked what that meant. Our heroine told her it was very important to her, because even though he was a thief, where was the proof? Dylan, perplexed, asked what she was talking about. Lydia explained to her that she'd just turned him into a slaughterhouse in front of a crowd of people. What if he said he didn't steal, but was merely brutally beaten? It was obvious since he was empty-handed. He must have run away before he could steal anything, and it looked like this guy just heard everything. Lydia again pointed out that there were many witnesses here who would say that she beat him, but her only argument was that he was a thief. Dylan continued to look coldly at Lady Lydia and asked in surprise what she was getting at. Our heroine smiled sweetly, looking at Dylan, and proudly said that she could give her testimony to help her. She might say something like, "This person wanted to attack me, but she was the only one who stopped and reacted." If she testifies, then even without evidence that he is a thief, her actions will be justified. There's no evidence he intended to attack, but the police will be satisfied. Our heroine asked if she agreed. As she explained, she doesn't need much because she just wants to be alone in a quiet place, and this is much better than being arrested for assault. Although reluctantly, Dylan agreed to the proposal, saying that she would only give 5 minutes. After the thief's handover to the police, the testimony, and finally, lunchtime passed. Then they went to Dylan's house to talk. The girl immediately said that she agreed not only because the offer was beneficial to her, but also because she found Ari nice. Our heroine asked her in surprise, and the girl replied that she simply liked beautiful people. Lydia, surprised, thanked her. The action soon shifts to Dylan's house. Our heroine was a little embarrassed, but she knew that if Dylan liked beautiful people, she would definitely like Ari. Anyway, right now, our heroes were sitting in the living room and waiting for Ari and Dylan to talk. At this point, Darbury suddenly turned to the lady, saying that she looked pleased. Did she really think that everything would work out? One way or another, he told her that even if she had done a lot, it would be more important for her to give Lady Grace the opportunity to show herself. Our heroine raised her hand, indicating her confidence that everything was fine. Darbury nevertheless asked where she got such confidence from. Lydia asked, surprised, if he didn't think everything was too good. Darbury asked her if she knew why Dylan was so famous. Our heroine looked at him again in surprise and said that he himself told her that she won 5 times in a row in Hidden. Darbury said that wasn't all she had accomplished. She had broken the wrist of an aristocrat's son who had mocked her. Lydia screamed in disbelief. The knight said it was true and that rumors had spread quickly. Of course, several years had passed since he heard the story, but he still remembered it. Lydia asked how she got away with it. The guy said that she was very lucky because the witness was another aristocrat who had a score to settle with the victim. The man said that he had tripped while running wounded, and of course there were no other witnesses. Lydia asked about the special rights of the aristocracy. Darbury told her that the knights couldn't even touch her with the tip of a blade. Our heroine understood that she hadn't come forward to publicly condemn her because of the witness, and physical violence was out of the question. Now it all makes sense. In this case, the girl decided that Dylan was really very strong, so she liked her more and more. Our heroine suddenly asked if there was a continuation of the story. Darbury, perplexed, once again replied that she had broken the aristocrat's wrist, and that was the whole story. Lydia nevertheless told him that this noble scion had done something wrong. After all, he had mocked Dylan Ari, for his part would not do the same, so everything would be fine. Darbury suddenly remembered Essie and told Lady Lydia that brothers and sisters stay close no matter what. But our heroine still felt uneasy. She wondered if this conversation didn't bother Darbury at all. She asked him if the swordswoman Ari would harm her, knowing that she was alone with Dylan, and he had not told her anything. At that moment, the guy smiled slyly and turned his head to the side as if keeping silent about something. Lydia immediately realized he'd made this story up to scare her. She laughed and said it wasn't fair. Just at that very moment, a joyful Ari ran into the room and told her sister that she had done it. At this time, Dylan, who was standing nearby, did not understand what she had done and how it happened. Our heroine asked what they had agreed upon. Ari told her that they had first entered into a verbal agreement and would sign a formal contract later. Nevertheless, Ari told her that Dylan would begin accompanying her. Today, Lydia, surprised, asked if she was sure about the verbal contract. Nevertheless, the girl intervened and said that she always kept her word. Now that the contract was signed, she was responsible for her safety. She also added that if she messed up, they could chop off her head. Lydia thought they weren't planning on doing that yet, since she was more reliable than she thought. At that moment, Dylan looked at Darbury and said hello to the lucky guy, saying that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Lydia and Ari watched them in surprise, wondering if they knew each other. Darbury seemed to know a lot about Dylan. The guy smiled at her and told her it was true. The girl said she'd heard he was doing well, but now she saw it for herself. Darbury told Dylan that she was pretty good-looking too. Lydia, however, intervened and asked, surprised, if they really knew each other. The guy said they'd crossed paths in the past. Lydia decided to ask Dylan why she was acting like she knew him well. Dylan sighed heavily and said that before she didn't want to talk to a traitor who had joined the aristocrats, but now she was the same. That's why she extended her hand and told Darbury that she was pleased to meet him. The guy happily extended his hand in return and said he was also glad to meet her. Lydia and Ari, however, watched in bewilderment. After some time, our heroine asked in bewilderment whether they were really rivals. The girl said that it was true because their destinies were indeed closely connected, and then she was taller than him. However, based on updated information, she admitted that this ugly duckling had overtaken her. She was 181 centimeters tall at the age of 26, while Darbury was 185 centimeters tall and only 24. He asked her to choose her words carefully because he has ears. Dylan sighed and told Sir Darbury that he had become too proper. There was no pleasure in teasing him anymore. Our heroine found this quite interesting, as they were enemies in name, but practically a perfect match. What does the future hold for them?